Rock and roll music is the most barbaric form of nonsense ever heard by human ears. Yes. Its attraction stems from barbaric beats that would not even appeal to a smart caveman. Appeals to the lower natures of men and is disgusting. The solution to this problem is to send these savage rock and roll punks to another country. Signed, Elvis Presley.
May I ask you, so that I don't look too naive, a tough question right off the bat?
And whether I'm a Democrat or Republican?
Oh, baby.
Oh, Margaret Thatcher is not in town. She actually is in Washington and with meetings, and a reporter asked her what the biggest contribution that Great Britain has made. And she said, deporting Robin Leach.
Hello, 1, 2. Attention Kmart shoppers, aisle 34, garden hose and lawnmowers.
Well, welcome to The Tonight Show. Let me explain. This part of the program is what we call the monologue. You know where the term monologue comes from? I don't know if you know. It's kind of interesting. Log comes from the Greek root, meaning a collection of comments. And money comes from the word Monica, meaning a young intern who's easy to make fun of. Yeah. So you have monologue. You see, you have monologue.
I've been giving this situation a lot of thought. You know, this is a true story. When I was a little boy, I remember watching The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson and thinking, someday I'm going to host that show for 7 months.
Welcome to The Tonight Show. This is the first Tonight Show broadcast from New York in over 40 years. Good, huh? Welcome. I'm Jimmy Fallon, and I'll be your host for now.
September 27th, 2024 will mark the 70th anniversary of The Tonight Show, a television institution that remains as popular today as it did when it premiered back in 1954. Throughout its history, The Tonight Show has had 6 different hosts over the course of 7 decades, each to varying successes, consistently ranking as the top-rated late-night show on television, one of the most profitable shows in the history of NBC, memorable moments and experiences that TV audiences will never forget. The Tonight Show has its permanent place in the annals of television history. But it was never easy. Varying controversies over the 70-year history of The Tonight Show, from network interference, to jokes getting unnecessarily pulled, to hosts literally quitting their show on the air, to new heads at NBC trying to bully the big moneymakers, to hosting controversy after hosting controversy after hosting controversy. The Tonight Show has seen it all, done it all, and been through it all in the last 7 decades. This is the story of how we got there. As with all stories, we have to go back to the beginning. The year is 1897, and in Poland, an inventor by the name of inventor Jan Stepanek patented a color television system in 1897, using a selenium photoelectric cell at the transmitter, an electromagnetic controlling an oscillating mirror, and a moving prism at the receiver. But his system contained no means of analyzing the spectrum of colors at the transmitting end. and could not have worked as he described it. Another inventor, Hovhannes Adamian, also experimented with color television as early as 1907. The first color television project is claimed by him and was patented in Germany on March 31st, 1908, then in Britain on April 1st, 1908, and in France and in Russia in 1910. Nearly 40 years later, television began to become the norm thanks to CBS becoming one of the first networks to begin testing the usage of color television in 1940. And American television broadcasting at the time was considered on a variety of markets in a wide range of sizes, each competing for programming and dominance within separate technology until deals were made with standards agreed upon in 1941. On April 30th, 1939, NBC became the latest network to make the jump from radio to television. 11 years later, NBC was looking to cement new groundbreaking territory in areas not just in radio, but in primetime as well, with the help of their president, Sylvester Pat Weaver, who's the father of somebody you might be familiar with.
Get away from her, you bitch!
Weaver saw untapped potential in areas that were not on most radars for other networks and decided to test the possibility of a show in the then unknown landscape of late-night television. That show was Broadway Open House and premiered on May 29th, 1950.
Here is the fellow who's in charge of the show, and Jerry Lester is his name. Just call me Beanbag. Jerry Lester is
The show was originally planned to be hosted by comic Don Creech Hornsby, so named because he yelled Creech a lot. Hornsby had been brought into the variety show business by Bob Hope, whose topical humor would serve as the basis for most of its late-night talk shows that would follow. 1 week before he was to begin hosting, the 26-year-old Hornsby suddenly contracted polio, from which he died on the day that he was set to host his first show, May 22, 1950. Hornsby's sudden demise forced NBC to postpone the show and rush to find new hosts on short notice. For the first few weeks, there were different hosts, including Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis, Henry Youngman, and Robert Oldham, among others, with Maury Amsterdam hosting Mondays and Wednesdays. Broadway Open House was performed before a live studio audience in the manner of a stage show. Pat Weaver, an NBC executive at the time, noticed that the positive feedback that Jerry Lester, the then host of Cavalcade of Stars for Dumont, and his manic personality had received on a recent appearance on NBC, and offered Lester the hosting position almost immediately. Lester initially hosted the Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday episodes of Broadway Open House until Amsterdam exited the show, leaving Lester the sole host. Lester performed sketches with his crew of sidekicks, including some of the earliest TV appearances of brassy Barbara Nichols, running through standard nightclub comedy routines and introducing the show's vocal group, the Mellowrooks. Lester's signature piece was to twist his eyeglasses at a 45-degree angle on his face. The show had occasional guests including Lenny Bruce, who appeared in May of 1950, and Charlie Parker, who appeared on October 31st, 1950. There is an audio recording of this that exists of his appearance on the show. And there were also audience participation bits, such as having women from the audience join the female cast members in modeling fur coats. Lester's fondness for beanbags became a running gag on the series, and the sponsors included Anchor Hawking Glassware and Blatt's Beer.
How are you, Jerry? Oh, I feel very talented tonight. I told you the truth. You're lonely because you're just a bean.
Network variety shows were broadcast weekly, with the production staff having 1 week to create each new episode. Broadway Open House was under much more pressure, and it was a continuing challenge to come up with fresh material on a nightly basis.
All the brains thought that radio stopped at 10 o'clock, television stopped at 10 o'clock, so the contribution was the fact that we opened up an hour that people stay up. We proved it.
Starlet Jenny Lewis was given no script and told, "You just sit there and act dumb, your name is Dagmar."
How do you like my equipment?
With her new name, she sat on a stool with a sign around her neck saying "Girl Slinger," did breathing exercises, and soon performed as a reader of poems and plays, while Lester made occasional jokes about her hidden talents. Her appearances created a sensation, leading to much press coverage and a salary increase from $75 to $1,250. Lester was now in the peculiar position of being the second banana on his own show, and he asked NBC to put him in another program. Lester left Broadway Open House in May of 1951, and Dagmar carried on as host. On July 16, 1951, she was featured on the front cover of Life, and the show came to an end 1 month later. Lester was retained as a rotating host for a new, earlier primetime variety show the next season called Chesterfield's Sound-Out Time, along with Fred Allen and Bob Hope. NBC filled the late-night time slot for the next year with Mary Kay's Nightcap, a non-comic show in which Mary Kay Stearns previews the next day's programming. For a short time, Dagmar was given a weekly late-night show of her own entitled Dagmar's Canteen. But the show's even later time slot at 12:15 on a Sunday morning and the lack of a comic partner for Dagmar to foil were factors in the show being short-lived. Dagmar's run on Open House and her appearances on other shows such as Colgate Comedy Hour, The Milton Berle Show, and Masquerade Party made her the first major female star of television. She continued making appearances on several shows during the late 1950s, specifically on Jack Parr's version of The Tonight Show. Which brings us into talking about the first host of The Tonight Show, Steve Allen.
Let's go back to 1953.
Okay. Oh, you mean in a certain sense. I'm sorry. All right.
Steve Allen was born on December 26, 1921. Allen was born in New York City, the only child of Billy Allen and Belle Montrose, a husband and wife vaudeville comedy team. His father died when he was an infant. Allen was raised on the south side of Chicago, largely by his mother's Irish Catholic family. Milton Berle called Allen's mother the funniest woman in vaudeville. Allen ran away at home at 16 and described in interviews the ease with which she descended into begging. Allen's first radio job was on station KOY in Phoenix, Arizona, after he left Arizona State Teachers College in Tempe while a sophomore. He enlisted in the United States Army during World War II and was trained as an infantryman. He served his enlistment period at Camp Roberts, California. Afterwards, he returned to Phoenix before moving back to California. Though he got his start in radio, Allen is best known for his extensive network television career. He gained national attention as a guest host on Arthur Godfrey's Talent Scouts. He then created a late-night talk show in New York City that debuted in July of 1953 on local station WNBT-TV, now WNBC-TV. The following year, on September 27, 1954, the show went on the full NBC network schedule as The Tonight Show, with fellow radio personality Gene Rayburn, who would later go on to become the host of such hit game shows as Match Game, as the original announcer. The show ran from 11:15 to 1 a.m. on the East Coast.
This is kind of a mild little show. I don't expect you to say, boy, what a program. No, just look at it and, decide in about a week what you think about it. It's not as spectacular. It's going to be kind of a monotonous, I think.
While Today was developed by Sylvester Pat Weaver, who is often credited as the Tonight Show creator, Allen often pointed out that he had created it earlier at a local New York show. Allen told his first nationwide audience that very first evening, "This is tonight, and I can't think of too much to tell you about it except I want to give you the bad news first. This program is going to go on forever. You think you're tired now? Wait until you see 1 o'clock roll around." It was as host of The Tonight Show that Allen pioneered the man-on-the-street comedic interviews and audience participation comedy breaks that went on to become staples of late-night television. Allen's version of the show originated such talk show staples as an opening monologue, celebrity interviews, audience participation, and comedy bits in which cameras were taken outside the studio, as well as music. Among the members of Allen's musical ensemble were Steve Lawrence and Edie Gourmet, who later became a married couple. The success of the show led to Allen receiving a separate weekly primetime show which aired on Sunday nights. Allen gave up the Monday and Tuesday shows, with guest hosts taking over for the summer of 1956. Beginning that fall, Ernie Kovacs, who came over from the faltering Dumont Television Network, became the original Monday and Tuesday host for the 1956-1957 season, with his own cast of regulars, including his own announcer, Bill Wendell, who would later work with David Letterman.
Here he is, the great El Clumsy.
It has nothing to do with modesty, but I've always been a little bit uncomfortable taking compliments for having created the talk show. But I honestly assume and believe that a million years ago there was some guy sitting on a tree stump in the jungle someplace, and on the fallen log just to his right there were a couple of other guys that stopped by and sat there for a minute, and he was talking to them. I imagine 3 men altogether do not sit silently. He probably said, "Did you catch your fish this morning?" And they probably said, "Yeah, 2, but one of them got away and my wife stole the other one," or whatever. So that is all there is to a talk show. I'm quite serious.
A kinescope with the very first episode of The Tonight Show has survived, and Allen's opening monologue has been rebroadcasted many times on Tonight Show anniversary specials and in documentaries such as Television, and more recently in NBC's 50 Years of Late Night special. In his opening remarks, Allen makes the persistent statement that tonight is going to go on forever, an apparent reference to the show's running time, then clocking in at 105 minutes with commercials. With several hours over the decades, it has done just that, albeit with a much different meaning than Allen intended.
The solution to this problem is to send these savage rock and roll punks to another country. Signed, Elvis Presley.
In June of 1956, NBC offered Allen a new primetime show in the Sunday night variety hour area, The Steve Allen Show. NBC's goal was to dethrone CBS's top-rated The Ed Sullivan Show. The show included a typical run of star performers, including early television appearances by rock and roll pioneers Elvis Presley, Jerry Lee Lewis, and Fats Domino. Many popular television and film personalities were guest stars, including Bob Hope, Kim Novak, Errol Flynn, Abbott and Costello, Esther Williams, Jerry Lewis, Martha Raye, The Three Stooges, and a host of others. The show's regulars were Tom Poston, Louis Nye, Bill Dana, Don Knotts, Pat Harrington Jr., Dayton Allen, and Gabriel Dell. All except film veteran Dell, who had appeared in the Bowery Boys movie series, also known as the Dead End Kids and the East Side Kids. They were relatively obscure performers prior to the stints with Allen, and all went on to superstardom of their own. The comedians in Allen's gang often were seen in his man-on-the-street interviews about some topical subjects. Poston would appear as a dullard who could not remember his very own name. Nye's character was an effeminate advertising executive named Gordon Hathaway, known for greeting the host with, "Hi-ho, Steve Areno." Dana played amiable Latino Jose Jimenez. Knotts was an exceedingly jittery man who, when asked if he was nervous, invariably replied with an alarming "no." Harrington was the Italian immigrant and former golf pro Guido Panzini. Dayton Allen, who would get his start pairing various characters on the television series Howdy Doody, played wide-eyed zany, answering any given question with a question, "Why not?" Dell usually portrayed straight men in sketches, policemen, newsmen, dramatic actors, etc., and occasionally played the character Boris Nadell, a Bela Lugosi Dracula lookalike.
Folks, we landed in Cuba. Let's get out of here.
Other recurring routines included crazy shots, also known as wild pictures, a series of side gags accompanied by Allen on piano, Allen inviting audience members to select 3 musical notes at random, and then compromising a song based on the notes, a satire of radio's long-running The Answer Man, and a precursor to Johnny Carson's Karnak the Magnificent. For example, "It toot bloot," and Allen replying, "How many pizzas did you eat, Caesar?" And dramatic comedic readings of real letters to the editors from New York City newspapers.
In case you tuned in late, this is a scene from the new picture, Pedestrian.
Allen's show also had one of the longest unscripted crack-ups on live television when Allen began laughing hysterically during Big Bill's Allen's Sports Roundup. Allen, known for his infectious, high-pitched cackling laugh, laughed uncontrollably for over a minute with the audience laughing along, because, as he later explained, he caught sight of his unkempt hair on an off-camera monitor. He kept brushing his hair and changing hats to hide the messy hair, and the more he tried to correct his appearance, the messier and funnier it got.
Here it is now, you'll see.
Good evening, this is your old Indian sportscaster. Your old stupid jerk Bill Allen bringing you, how are you, the complete sports roundup in the world of sports for all you jerky sports out there in Sportsland. Well, what's new in sports? I'll tell you what's new. The 1958 Ouch baseball season is getting underway with the annual... Good night, folks. That's all serious. That's it. Now, the annual spring... All right, here we go. Now. Oh, if only the script were this good. All right, here we go. The annual spring training warm-up. The big league teams are all at their spring training headquarters around the country. Let's see what's happening. Bill Allen's baseball scoop. Scoop! You're a better man than I am there. St. Petersburg, Florida. The New York Yankees have finally given trying to sign up the Yankee rookie holdout, Lefty Gerber. Lefty's been holding out since 1921. Now we're in trouble. All right. Joshua, we're going to lose just a few of the stations here for about 1 minute. See that little white dot in the corner of the screen over there?
No, yes. I don't know what you're talking about.
Oh, there we are. Okay, while 1, 2, 3.
No, I don't see anything. This man is blind.
Allen also helped the then-new Polaroid camera become popular by demonstrating its instant picture capabilities during the live commercials and amassed a huge financial windfall for his work because he had opted to pay for it in Polaroid Corporation stock. Allen remained host of The Tonight Show for 3 nights of the week. Mondays and Tuesday nights were taken up by guest hosts for most of the summer of '56, then by Ernie Kovacs through January until 1957, when he left the show to devote his attention to the Sunday night program. It was his and NBC's hope that the Steve Allen Show could defeat Ed Sullivan in the ratings. Nevertheless, Maverick often bested both in audience sizes. In September of 1959, Allen relocated to Los Angeles and left Sunday night television in the 1959-60 season, originating from NBC's Color City in Burbank as the Steve Allen Plymouth Show on Monday nights. Back in Los Angeles, he continued to write songs, hosted other variety shows, and wrote books and articles about comedy. After being canceled at NBC in 1960, the show will return in the fall of 1961 on ABC as the new Steve Allen Show, with many of the same cast members from the previous show returning, and new cast members including Joey Foreman, Buck Henry, the Smothers Brothers, and Tim Conway, and Allen's wife, Jane Meadows. This version, however, didn't last long and was canceled after 14 episodes. After Allen's primetime show ended in 1960, he would intermittently return to the format he used on The Tonight Show, while syndicated programs bearing this name Steve Allen, from 1962 to 1964, 68 to 69, 1971. Allen would also return to occasionally guest host The Tonight Show during the Johnny Carson era. Between 1971 and 1982, he guest hosted 18 times. He would make his final appearance on The Tonight Show during Jay Leno's tenure at the show's 40th anniversary broadcast in 1994. Allen was a pianist and a prolific composer. By his own estimate, he's written more than 8,500 songs, some of which were recorded by numerous leading singers. Allen won the 1964 Grammy Award for Best Original Jazz Composition for Gravy Waltz, for which he wrote the lyrics. He also wrote more than 50 books, including novels, children's books, and books on opinions, including his final book, Vulgarians at the Gate, Trash TV, and Raunch Radio in 2001. So with Steve Allen gone, The Tonight Show went straight to the next host, right? Well, not exactly. In fact, it was completely not what you would have expected to happen. See, rather than continuing with the same format that Allen and Kovacs had made famous with The Tonight Show beforehand, NBC decided to change the show's format from a comedy show to a news and feature show, similar to that of the network's popular morning program, The Today Show. That new show would be renamed Tonight America After Dark. It was first hosted by Jack LaScully and then by Al Jasbo Collins, with interviews conducted by Hyde Gardner and music provided by the Lou Steen Trio, later replaced by the Mort Lindsay Quartet and then the Johnny Gallerini Quartet. This new version of the show was unsuccessful, resulting in a significant number of NBC affiliates dropping the show, and the format eventually returned to a comedy-oriented top variety program on July 29, 1957. The next host for that was a man by the name of Jack Parr.
Many people say, well, what kind of a show is this going to be? And the thought occurred to me as I was walking out here. I really don't know.
Jack Harold Parr was born on May 1st, 1918 in Canton, Ohio, the son of Lillian M. Hayne and Howard Parr. He moved with his family to Jackson, Michigan, about 40 miles south of Lansing. As a child, he developed a stutter which he learned to manage. He contracted tuberculosis when he was 14 and left school at 16. After dropping out of Jackson High School, Parr worked as a broadcaster for WIBM, a local radio station. He went on to work as a humorous disc jockey at other Midwest stations, including WJR in Detroit, WIRE in Indianapolis, WGAR in Cleveland, and WBEN in Buffalo. In his book, P.S. Jack Parr, he recalled doing utility duty at WGAR in 1938 when Orson Welles broadcasted his famous simulated alien invasion, The War of the Worlds, over the CBS network and its WGAR affiliate. Attempting to calm possibly panicked listeners, Parr announced, "The world is not coming to an end. Trust me. When have I ever lied to you?" In 1943, Parr was drafted into the U.S. Army during World War II, which interrupted his tenure as the host of WBEN's morning show, The Sun Greeters Club. He was assigned to the USO in the South Pacific to entertain the troops. Parr was a clever, wisecracking master of ceremonies, and he narrowly escaped being disciplined when he impersonated senior officers, especially Colonel Ralph Parr. After World War II, Parr opted not to return to WBEN, instead seeking opportunities in network radio and film. He worked in radio as a fill-in on The Breakfast Club, and appeared as a host on Take It or Leave It, a show with a top prize of $64. In 1947, Jack Benny, who was impressed by Parr's USO performances, suggested that Parr serve as his 1947 summer replacement. Parr was enough of a hit on Benny's show that Benny's sponsor, the American Tobacco Company, decided to keep him on the air, moving him to ABC for the fall season. Parr later refused American Tobacco's suggestion that he could come up with a weekly running gag or gimmick, saying he wanted to get away from that kind of old hat comedy, the kind that being practiced by Jack Benny and Fred Allen. The show was then terminated, as earning Parr the enduring image of a spoiled kid. A profile of Parr by the Museum of Broadcast Communications suggested that Parr's later emulated Benny's mannerisms. Parr signed as a contract player for Howard Hughes' RKO studio in the immediate post-war period, appearing as the MC in Variety Time, a 1948 low-budget compilation of vaudeville sketches. He later recalled that RKO producers had trouble figuring out what kind of screen characters he could play until one of the executives dubbed him Kay Kaiser, bandleader who had made films for RKO, with Warren. Another compared his leading man appearance with Alan Ladd. Parr projected a pleasant personality on film, and RKO called him back to MC another film vaudeville show, Footlight Varieties, in 1951. He also appeared in the 1950 film Walk Softly Stranger, starring Joseph Cotton. In 1951, he played Marilyn Monroe's boyfriend in the 20th Century Fox film Love Nest. Parr returned to radio in 1950, hosting the $64 question for one season, then quitting in a wage dispute after the show's sponsor pulled out and NBC insisted everyone involved take a pay cut. In 1956, he gave radio one more try, hosting a disc jockey effort on ABC called The Jack Parr Show. Parr once described that show as so modest we did it from the basement rumpus room of our Bronxville house. Parr got his first taste of television in the 1950s, appearing as a comic on The Ed Sullivan Show and hosting two game shows, Up to Par in 1952 and Bank of the Stars in 1953, before hosting the morning show on CBS in 1954. He had the Jack Parr Show on CBS, a Monday through Friday 1 to 1:30 show that ended in May of 1956. Parr guest starred twice in 1958 on Polly Bergen's short-lived NBC comedy variety show, The Polly Bergen Show. In July of 1957, after the failure of Tonight America After Dark, NBC reverted its late-night show Tonight to a talk variety show format, as it had been during Steve Allen's tenure as host. Jack Parr was brought in to host a reformatted Tonight. He was at the time working for CBS and hosted the network's The Morning Show, which was similar to NBC's Today Show, before he agreed to jump networks and take over Tonight. Under Parr, most of the NBC affiliates that had dropped the show during the ill-fated run of America After Dark, or had never even picked it up, began airing the show once again.
I walk out in New York, and if there's applause, I'm surprised, and I say... and the audience sits there saying...
Parr's era began the practice of branding the series after the host, and as such, the program, that was still called Tonight, was marketed as The Jack Parr Show. A combo band conducted by Parr's Army buddy pianist, Jose Milas, filled commercial breaks and backed music entertainers. When Parr was on vacation, guest hosts presided over the show. One of them was somebody that will become very familiar with The Tonight Show in the future. Other guest hosts included Jonathan Winters, Orson Bean, as well as the show's announcer, Hugh Downs.
What do you do in TV?
I'm a personality type show.
Oh, really? I never watched.
I'll tell you if you don't. I'll tell you if you don't tell anybody. Because this may come as quite a surprise to you. Because I don't. I mean, I'm informal and
I was told when I
when I'm speaking, you always wait because you don't know who I am yet.
I'm beginning to find out.
Starting on September 19th, 1960, it was one of the first regularly scheduled shows to be videotaped in color, with the show recorded very early in the evening and broadcasted from 11:15 p.m. to 1 a.m. Eastern Time that night. Only a handful of complete Jack Parr Tonight Show episodes exist. All of them are black and white kinescope recordings. No color videotapes of any complete Parr Tonight shows are known to exist. Parr hosted the program from 1957 to 1962.
I'm gonna get banned. You want to do commercials for that?
Are you Luke? Are you little Luke?
I don't drink. Everybody thinks I drink.
What are you on? You've been there and back.
Isn't that silly? You better sell it before we get in a lot of trouble.
Don't open your purse. I'm afraid what's in there.
Parr's original announcer was actor Franklin Pangborn, but he was fired after only a few weeks for not showing enough, quote, spontaneous enthusiasm, unquote. His replacement was Hugh Downs, who stayed with Parr to the very end. At first, the show was called Tonight, starring Jack Parr. After 1959, it was officially known as The Jack Parr Show, or The Jack Parr Tonight Show, a phrasing which led to the name The Tonight Show as opposed to simply Tonight, being adopted permanently after Parr's departure. Only a few minutes of video of Parr's talk host career in color are known to exist today. NBC's policy at the time was to preserve programming on black and white kinescopes, but this policy only applied to live or videotaped primetime programming, and as such, the videotapes of most of Parr's Tonight Show appearances were taped over and no longer exist. A policy that continued through the first 10 years of Johnny Carson's hosting of the same series. During Parr's stint as host, The Tonight Show became an entertainment juggernaut. Parr generated the most obsessive fascination and curiosity from press and public of anyone who had ever hosted the show. He strove for compelling conversation as well as humor. His guests tended to be literate racketeurs such as Peter Ustinov or intellects such as William F. Buckley Jr., as opposed to just actors and other performers selling their current work, while Parr earned a reputation as a superb storyteller. He surrounded himself with a memorable group of regulars and semi-regulars, including Cliff Arquette as the homespun Charlie Weaver,
Leonard Box. You remember Leonard Box?
I heard you speak of it.
Yeah. Leonard, he's a small man.
I understand.
Leonard Box bought an automatic milking machine to milk his cows because he felt he was losing his grip. The other night he forgot to turn it off. And this morning all his cows were turned wrong side out.
Author-illustrator Alexander King, Teddy Thurman, NBC's sultry Miss Monitor, and comedy actresses Peggy Cass and Dodie Goodman. Goodman was a regular from shortly after the show's debut until Parr fired her in 1958. Goodman frequently stepped on Parr's lies and was seen as an uncontrollable upstager. Parr's oft-repeated expression, "I kid you not," sometimes Humphrey Bogart as Captain Philip Keogh, uttered often in the K-Mutiny, became a national catchphrase. In 1959, Parr's gag writer, Jack Douglas, became a best-selling author with My Brother Was an Only Child, The Funny Thing Happened to Me on the Way to the Grave, and autobiography. After his regular appearances with Parr, Douglas's Japanese wife, Riko, often appeared, as did Hungarian beauty queen Zsa Zsa Gabor. French comedian Genevieve and several British performers appeared as well. Parr enjoyed conversing with foreigners as he knew that their accents would spice up the proceedings. Hal Gurney directed Tonight for much of Parr's tenure, as well as the period between Parr's departure and Carson's arrival, when the show was presented with a series of guest hosts. Gurney went on to direct Parr's primetime program, The Jack Parr Program, and later directed a lot of stuff from David Letterman. In 1959, Parr was criticized for his interview with Cuban leader Fidel Castro. Parr's on-location interview was the last time any American late-night show filmed in Cuba until Conan O'Brien visited the country in 2015 for an episode of his show Conan. On December 1st, 1959, Parr again made news by asking an apparently inebriated Mickey Rooney to leave the program, remarking, "It's a shame he was such a great talent." Rooney and Parr quickly reconciled. In 1961, Parr broadcasted a show from Berlin just as the Berlin Wall was going up. He attacked members of the United States Senate and the U.S. press who criticized him, including syndicated columnist Dorothy Kilgallen of the New York Journal American, Earl Wilson of the New York Post, Jack Gould of the New York Times, Irv Kupsnit of the Chicago Sun-Times, and Senator Mike Mansfield. Parr also engaged in a number of public feuds. One of them was with CBS luminary Ed Sullivan, and another with Walter Winchell. The latter feud effectively ended Winchell's career, beginning a shift in power for him from print to television. Parr famously introduced actress Jane Mansfield with the line, "Here they are, Jane Mansfield," a reference to Mansfield's breast. The writer of that joke was Dick Cavett, who would later go on to host his own show on ABC. Parr was often unpredictable and emotional. The most notorious example of this kind of an on-screen behavior was demonstrated on the February 10, 1960 show, where one of his jokes was cut from a broadcast by studio censors. The joke in question involved a woman writing to a vacation resort and inquiring about the availability of a WC. The woman used that term to mean water closet, aka a bathroom, but the gentleman who received the letter misunderstood WC to mean Wayside Chapel, aka a church. The full text of the joke is this. An English lady is visiting Switzerland. She asks about the location of the WC. The Swiss, thinking she is referring to the Wayside Chapel, leaves her a note that says, in part, "The WC is situated 9 miles from the room that you will occupy. It is capable of holding about 229 people, and it is only open on Sunday and Thursday. It may interest you to note that my daughter was married in the WC, and it was there that she met her husband. I shall be delighted to reserve the best seat for you, if you wish, where you will be seen by everyone. NBC censors replaced that section of the show with the news coverage and failed to inform Parr of that decision, which led to, on February 11, 1960, Jack Parr doing something completely unthinkable and quitting his show on the air.
During the taping of the Jack Parr program earlier this evening, Jack Parr walked off the show in protest against the deletion of one of his stories from last night's show. In the exercise of its proper responsibility to the public, NBC deleted this material last night because it considered it to be in bad taste. It is NBC's hope that Jack Parr will reconsider his action and return to the program.
I've made a decision about what I'm going to do. And only one person knows about this. It's Hugh Downs. My wife doesn't know it, but I'll be home in time and I'll tell her. I'm leaving The Tonight Show. There must be a better way of making a living than this. There's a way of entertaining people without being constantly involved in some form of controversy, which is on me all the time. It's rough on my wife and child, and I don't need it. I like the National Broadcasting Company. They've been swell to me, and I've been pretty wonderful to them. I took over a show with 60 stations. There's now 158. The show is sold out. It's the highest, I think, money producer for this network, and I believe I was let down by this network at a time when I could have used their help. You have been peachy to me always. Jack, you know what I said to you.
Although Parr had earlier told his announcer Hugh Downs of his intentions to quit the show, Dow at first thought that he was joking. He expected the host to return to the stage, but the abrupt departure left Downs to finish the broadcast himself. While Parr traveled outside the country, his disappearance became a national news event. The entire broadcast of this episode exists on an audio tape from WMCT in Memphis. Urged to return to the show by his friend Jonathan Winters, Parr returned on March 7, 1960, strolling on stage, struck a pose, and said this.
I believe my last words were that there must be a better way of making a living than this. Well, I have looked. And there isn't.
That line produced a burst of laughter from the audience. He then went on to explain his departure with typical frankness. Leaving the show was a childish and perhaps emotional thing. I have been guilty of such action in the past and will perhaps be again. I'm totally unable to hide what I feel. It is not an asset in show business, but I shall do the best I can to amuse and entertain you and let other people speak freely as I have in the past. Jack Parr left the show on March 30th, 1962, citing the fact that he could no longer handle the load of putting on an hour and 45-minute show a night, 5 nights a week. Over the course of its run, Parr was given more time off so that most Mondays featured a guest host, and all Friday shows were Best of Parr repeats, giving Parr only 3 nights of material to fill. To fulfill the rest of his NBC contract after leaving Tonight, Parr hosted a primetime weekly series, The Jack Parr Program, and aired weekly on Friday nights through 1965. Jack Parr, however, left The Tonight Show more popular than it ever was, and more popular than what Steve Allen did beforehand, which left a ton of pressure on the person that was going to eventually take over the role, and even bigger shoes for the next man to take his place, who was kind of in the middle of a career question mark, if you will, because he did have success in Hollywood and actually had several shows over at CBS in the 1950s, but his career kind of took down a little bit, getting a game show called Who Do You Trust, and a couple years later, after very much convincing, he decided to take that next step. And now, ladies and gentlemen, here's Johnny.
From New York, The Tonight Show, starring Johnny Carson. Johnny's guests tonight are Joan Crawford, Rudy Valley, Tony Bennett, Mel Brooks, the Phoenix Singers, Skitch Henderson with the NBC Orchestra, and me, I'm Ed McMahon.
ladies and gentlemen, thank you. This is kind of an emotional thing for me because I've known about this show for a long time. And the newspapers and the magazines, and I've probably been interviewed 150 times in the last 9 months since I've known about this. As I say, you work up to it. We come over here this afternoon, we meet the guests that are on the show, and you get kind of charged up. I don't mean to be maudlin about it, but I know that tonight a lot of my friends are watching all over the country, and I only have one feeling as I stand here knowing that so many people are watching. I want my nana.
John William Carson was born on October 23, 1925 in Corning, Iowa, to Ruth Elizabeth Carson and Homer Lloyd Kit Carson, a power company manager. Carson was the second of 3 children. He had an older sister, Catherine Kit Carson Sotsing, and a younger brother, Richard Dick Carson. Growing up in Iowa, Carson lived in the towns of Evoca, Clarinda, and Red Oak before moving to Norfolk, Nebraska at age 8. There, Carson grew up and began developing his talent for entertaining. At age 12, he found a book of magic at a friend's house and immediately purchased a mail-order magician's kit. After purchasing the kit, Carson practiced his entertainment skills on family members with card tricks. He was known for following his family members around saying, "Pick a card, any card." Carson's mother sewed him a cape, and his first performance was staged in front of the local Kiwanis Club. He debuted as the Great Carsoni at age 14 and was paid $3 a show. Soon, many other performances at local picnics and county fairs followed. After graduating from high school, Carson hitchhiked to Hollywood, California. There, he was arrested and fined $50 for impersonating a midshipman, a story often regarded as apocryphal. Carson joined the United States Navy on June 8, 1943, and received V-12 Navy College Training Program officer training at Columbia University and Millsaps College. Commissioned an ensign late in the war, Carson was assigned to the USS Pennsylvania in the Pacific, serving as a communications officer in charge of decoding encrypted messages. While in the Navy, Carson posted a 15-0-1 amateur boxing record with most of his bouts fought on board Pennsylvania. He was en route to the combat zone aboard a troop ship when the war ended. Carson later said that the high point of his military career was performing a magic trick for U.S. Secretary of the Navy James V. Forrestal. In a conversation with Forrestal, the Secretary asked Carson if he planned to stay in the Navy after the war. In response, Carson said no and told him he wanted to be a magician. Forrestal asked him to perform, and Carson responded with a card trick. Carson made the discovery that he could entertain and amuse someone as cranky and sophisticated as Forrestal.
This is WOW-TV, Channel 6, Omaha, Nebraska.
Carson began his broadcasting career in 1950 at WOW-AM, now KXSP, and WOW-TV, now WOW-TV in Omaha, Nebraska. He soon hosted a morning television program called The Squirrel's Nest. One of his routines involved interviewing pigeons on the roof of the local courthouse that would report on the political corruption they had seen. Carson supplemented his income by serving as master of ceremonies at local church dinners, attended by some of the same politicians and civic leaders he had lampooned on the radio.
And we were all doing radio at the time, of course. And there was an announcement put up beginning Monday. John Carson will do a 1-hour television show. That was my notice. So we went up and tried to pull something together. And we had a little set in the corner. And we went on the air Monday at 4.
We hope a good many of you are enjoying Christmas with your families today. And if you've exchanged presents already, probably had a very nice Christmas dinner. And that you'll sit down and enjoy the Christmas with the gang here at WOW-TV. My name's Johnny Carson.
And there was no money in television in those days, but nobody cared because you were learning what it was all about.
The wife of one of the Omaha political figures that Carson spoofed owned stock in a radio station in Los Angeles, and in 1951 referred Carson to her brother, who was influential in the emerging television market in Southern California. Carson joined CBS-owned Los Angeles TV station KNXT, now KCBS TV.
And where do you live, Mr. Bailey? I'm a native Californian. A native Californian? Yes, sir. Well, that means that you must have lived here for at least 2 years then, huh?
In 1953, comic Red Skelton, a fan of Carson's low-budget sketch comedy show Carson's Cellar, which ran from 51 to 53 on KNXT, asked Carson to join his show as a writer. The following year, Skelton accidentally knocked himself unconscious during rehearsal, an hour before his live show began. Carson successfully filled in for him.
The Red Skelton Review. My name is Johnny Carson. This afternoon at dress rehearsal, just about an hour and a half ago, Red slipped during one of the sketches and injured himself. And the injury is not really too serious, but Red's doctor advised him that it wouldn't be too best to do the show today. Personally, I think Red's doctor should do the show.
In 1955, Jack Benny invited Carson to appear on one of his programs during the opening and closing segments. Carson imitated Benny and claimed that Benny had copied his gestures. Benny predicted that Carson, who readily admitted Benny's substantial influence on aspects of his comedic delivery, would have a successful career as a comedian. Carson hosted several shows besides Carson Cellar, including the game show Earn Your Vacation in 1954 and the variety show The Johnny Carson Show from 1955 to 1956. He was a guest panelist on the original To Tell the Truth beginning in 1960, becoming a regular panelist from 1961 to 1962. After the primetime Johnny Carson show failed, Carson moved to New York City to host ABC's Who Do You Trust from 1957 to 1962. It was on Who Do You Trust that Carson met his future sidekick and straight man, Ed McMahon.
Who do you trust? Here's the star of our show, Johnny Carson.
Welcome to Who Do You Trust? We have another tie to break on the show.
Although Carson believed moving to daytime television would hurt his career, Who Do You Trust was a success. It was the first show where he could ad-lib and interview guests, and because of his on-camera wit, the show became the hottest item on daytime television during its 6 years on ABC. From his experience as a radio host, Carson would later write a parody for The New Yorker of former talk show host Dennis Miller, having the new role at the time in 2000 as an NFL sports analyst titled Proverbs of Dennis Miller. When Jack Parr left The Tonight Show in March of 1962 for his primetime show, Johnny Carson was chosen as Parr's successor. However, he was still under contract with ABC through September, and producer Don Feddersen, who held him to his contract until the day it expired, said he could not take over as host until October 1st of 1962.
It is no great secret, and I'm sure ABC won't mind if I mention this. What can they do to me if I do? Fire me today? But I go over to on The Tonight Show on NBC starting October the 1st as the host of that show, and Ed goes with me as the announcer on the show, so I wanted to mention that.
The months between Parr and Carson were filled by a series of guest hosts, which included several names such as Art Linklater, Joey Bishop, Bob Cummings, Merv Griffin, Jack Carter, Jan Murray, Peter Lynn Hayes, Mary Healy, Soupy Sales, Mort Saul, Steve Lawrence, Jerry Lewis, Jimmy Dean, Arlene Francis, Jackie Leonard, Hugh Downs, Groucho Marx, Hal March, and Donna O'Connor, many of whom later noted they were being led to believe that they were auditioning for the job. Francis was actually among the first women to ever host a late-night talk show. Griffin was so well received as a guest host that NBC gave him his own daytime talk show, the first of three he would host in his broadcast career, which debuted the same day Carson took over the late-night show. And Lewis's 2-week stint was so successful that NBC seriously considered retracting their offer to Carson. Lewis subsequently wound up hosting a lavish 2-hour primetime talk show for ABC entitled The Jerry Lewis Show, which was famously unsuccessful and continued his more successful movie career. ABC also picked up Dean as a variety show host, airing The Jimmy Dean Show for 3 years from 1963 to 1966. The show began under the title The Tonight Show during this interim, with Sketch Henderson returning as band leader. Hugh Downs remained as announcer's sidekick until taking over hosting duties on Today in September, at which point he was replaced by Ed Herlihy. Groucho Marx introduced Carson as the new host on October 1st, 1962. Ed McMahon was Carson's announcer and on-screen sidekick, the same role he filled on Who Do You Trust. McMahon also introduced Carson with the drawn-out catchphrase, "Here's Johnny." The Tonight Show Orchestra was, for Carson's first 4 years, still led by Sketch Henderson. After a brief stint by Milton DeLue, beginning in 1967, the NBC Orchestra was then headed by trumpeter Doc Severinsen, who had played in the band during the Henderson era. For all but a few months of the first decade on the air, Carson's Tonight Show was based in New York City. In 1972, the show moved to Burbank, California, into Studio One of NBC Studios West Coast, although it was announced as coming from nearby Hollywood for the remainder of his tenure. Carson lacked the mercurial, electric personality of Parr, and his version of The Tonight Show never riveted the country's attention the way that Parr's had. But his more predictable approach eventually became part of the cultural landscape by virtue of the fact that the viewership, in a basically three-network paradigm, was infinitely more monolithic than it later became. Examples included when he played the game Twister with Ava Gabor in 1966, which increased the sales of the relatively unknown game. In December of 1973, when Carson joked about an alleged shortage of toilet paper, panic buying and hoarding ensued across the United States as consumers emptied stores, causing a real shortage that lasted for weeks. Stores and toilet paper manufacturers had to ration supplies until the panic ended. Carson's ratings usually substantially led his time slot, in spite of the fact that he intermittently faced more late-night competitors, including Les Crane, Bill Dana, David Frost, Regis Philbin, Alan Thicke, Jerry Lewis, Joan Rivers, David Brenner, Pat Sajak, Ron Reagan, Dennis Miller, and most notably, Steve Allen, Arsenio Hall, Joey Bishop, Merv Griffin, and Dick Cavett. Carson saw his friend Cavett as his real competition, but Cavett was on ABC, a much smaller network at the time. As primetime variety shows such as The Ed Sullivan Show faded into prominence over the course of the 1970s, Carson's Tonight Show emerged as a showcase for all kinds of talent, as well as continuing the tradition of a vaudeville-style variety show. Carson's show continued Parr's tradition of launching the careers of a number of comedians. In Carson's case, Jerry Seinfeld, David Letterman, Joan Rivers, Jeff Foxworthy, Ellen DeGeneres, Freddie Prinze, David Brenner, Tim Allen, Drew Carey, Roseanne Barr, and another host you might be familiar with that will eventually take over Johnny Carson's place down the road.
Welcome to the Johnny Carson Tonight Show. Buddy Hackett's on the show, and he's about 1,000,000 times funnier than I am. But tonight we're getting paid the same.
So I went to the post office to get a stamp for the card, and I'm waiting online at the post office. You notice, I love these posters they have on the wall there. When you wait online, killers, murderers, thieves. Why the post office? What do they want us to do about it? Write the guy? Doesn't make any sense. I mean, do people rip these off the wall, go up to the counter? Yeah, give me a book of stamps and a search warrant. I'm going after this guy. I've had it up to here with his activity. You know, my main question about these posters on the wall is, why didn't they hold on to this guy when they'd taken his picture?
You know, 'cause women, we lie to men all the time, you know. It's not that we mean to or anything. It's just that it takes too long to explain the truth. Yeah, so it's like, oh, you're the best lover I ever had. It's never been like this. Stop, stop, you're killing me.
This is his first appearance with us on The Tonight Show. Would you welcome Tim Allen?
I love my tools. I walk into Sears, Craftsman area, my nipples get rock hard, I swear. One thing I could never understand is duct tape. You never leave a Sears without duct tape. 90-foot of silver grill, Permacell U.S.-made cloth-back duct tape. And nobody knows what this stuff's for. My motto is, you can't fix it, duck it.
Would you welcome Ellen DeGeneres?
That whole fitness thing runs in my family, though, I think. That my grandmother started walking 5 miles a day when she was 60. She's 97 today, and we don't know where the hell she is. I'm kidding. We know where she is. She's in prison. But, I'm kidding again. You know, I kid a lot because I'm a comedian.
A lot of people get bummed out when it rains. Not me. I love it when it rains. More rains, more I like it. Bring on the rain. When it rains really hard, see, I like to run stop signs just to make cops get out of their car. Yeah. Hey, hell with them. I got the money. Get out, man. Why make the money if you can't enjoy spending it? Just stand there and make them stand there in a big puddle in the rain. All right, you. You know why I stopped you? Yeah. You know why I ran a sign?
Carson also frequently used guest hosts, especially after 1981 when he negotiated a contract that gave him numerous weeks off every year, as well as Mondays. Frequent guest hosts, over 50 episodes each, included Joey Bishop, who hosted 177 times, mostly in the 60s, Joan Rivers, who hosted 93 times during the 70s and 80s, John Davidson 87 times, Bob Newhart 87 times, David Brenner 70 times, McLean Stevenson 58, Jerry Lewis 52, mostly in the 60s, David Letterman 51, mostly between 1980 and 1981, and Jay Leno. By the late 1980s, Leno was designated the permanent and only guest host. He consequently hosted several dozen episodes each year, totaling 333 guest host appearances during Carson's tenure. Johnny Carson's Tonight Show established the modern format of the late-night talk show. A monologue sprinkled with a rapid-fire series of 16 to 22 one-liners, Carson had a rule of no more than 3 on the same subject, which sometimes was followed by sketch comedy, then moving on to guest interviewers and performers by musicians and stand-up comedians in no fixed order. Occasionally, Carson interviewed prominent politicians such as Richard Nixon, Ronald Reagan, Bill Clinton, Robert F. Kennedy, and Hubert Humphrey. However, Carson refused to discuss his personal political views on the show out of concern it might alienate his audience, and resisted efforts from his writing staff, partially head writer and admitted liberal Marshall Brickman, to include more political material in the show. Other regulars were selected for their entertainment or information value in contrast to those who offered more cerebral conversation. His preference for access to Hollywood stars caused the show's move to the West Coast on May 1st, 1972. The Tonight Show would not return to New York until 2014 when Jimmy Fallon took the hosting reins. When asked about intellectual conversation on The Tonight Show, Carson and his staff invariably cited Carl Sagan, Paul Ehrlich, Margaret Mead, Gore Vidal, Shanna Alexander, Madeleine Murray O'Hare as guests. One television critic stated, however, he always presented them as if they were spinach for your diet when he did feature such names. Family therapist Carlford Broderick appeared on the show 10 times, and psychologist Joyce Brothers was one of Carson's more frequent guests. Carson, in general, did not feature pop comedy acts. Carson was not averse to using pop comedy himself, such acts with Gallagher being a prominent example. More commonly appeared when guest hosts helmed the program. Carson almost never socialized with guests before or after the show. Frequent interviewee Orson Welles recalled that Tonight Show employees were astonished when Carson visited Welles' dressing room to say hello before a show. Unlike his avocal counterparts Merv Griffin, Mike Douglas, and Dick Cavett, Carson was a comparatively cool host who only laughed when genuinely amused and abruptly cut short monotonous and embarrassing inept interviews. Mort Saul recalled, "The producers crouch down just off camera and holds up a card that says go to commercial, so Carson goes to a commercial, and the whole team rushes up to his desk to discuss what had gone wrong, like a pit stop at Le Mans." Actor Robert Blake once compared being interviewed by Carson to Facing the Death Squad or Broadway on open night. The publicity value of appearing on The Tonight Show was so great, however, that most guests were willing to take subjects themselves to the risk. In 1979, when Fred Silverman became the head of NBC, Carson took the network to court, claiming that he had become a free agent since April of that year because his recent contract was signed in 1972. Carson cited the California law barring certain contracts from lasting more than 7 years. NBC claimed that it had signed 3 agreements since then, and Carson was bound to the network until April of 1981. When the case was settled out of court, the friction between Carson and the network remained, and Carson was actively courted by rival network ABC, which was willing to double Carson's salary and offer him a lighter work schedule and ownership of the show. NBC, in turn, was ready to offer The Tonight Show to Carson's more frequent guest host at the time, Richard Dawson, which coincidentally makes sense because over at ABC, guess which show he was hosting at the time? Family Feud. Eventually, Carson reached an agreement that paid $25 million a year, while reducing his workload from 90 minutes to 60 minutes, with new shows airing only 3 nights a week, 37 weeks a year. A guest host would appear on Monday, and for most of Carson's 15 weeks on vacation, and Best of Carson reruns would air on Tuesdays, and also give him ownership of the show as well as its back catalog, and of the time slot following The Tonight Show, which again became Late Night with David Letterman, produced by Carson's production company. In September of 1980, Carson Productions gained ownership of the show after owning it from 1969 to the early 1970s. However, only 33 complete episodes of Johnny Carson's Tonight Show that had originally aired prior to May 1st, 1972, are known to exist. All of the shows during this period, including Carson's debut as host, are now considered lost. Carson himself initially encouraged the erasure of his archives, thinking that the shows were of no real value and that NBC should make guitar picks out of them. Carson's shows were preserved by NBC into the early 1970s, but then thrown out to free storage space after the show moved to Burbank, California, where Carson later learned of their destruction. He was furious. Other surviving material from this era have been found on kinescopes, held in the archives of the Armed Forces radio and television stations, or in the personal collection of the guests of the program. While a few moments, such as Tiny Tim's wedding, were preserved, New York meteorologist Dr. Frank Field, an occasional guest during the years when he was weather forecasting for WNBC TV, showed several clips of his appearances with Carson in a 2002 career retrospective. Field had maintained the clips in his own personal archives. There are also 2 appearances by Judy Garland in 1968 that still survive. John Lennon and Paul McCartney's joint appearance on the May 14, 1968 episode, guest hosted by Joe Garagiola, with a guest appearance by Tallulah Bankhead, was preserved on poor quality home kinescope and audio tape and separate recordings by Beatles fans. Similarly, the Supremes' May 22, 1967 appearance survives on a poorly quality kinescope with an audio recording of their April 5, 1968 appearance honoring the recently slain Martin Luther King Jr. was preserved. The program's archives is virtually complete from 1973 to 1992, and Carson's Productions has made those clips available through the power of YouTube and antenna television. Although no footage is known to remain of Carson's first broadcast as host of The Tonight Show on October 1, 1962, photographs taken the night survive, including Carson being introduced by Groucho Marx, as does an audio recording of Marx's introduction and Carson's first monologue. One of his first jokes upon starting the show, after receiving a few words of encouragement from Marx, one of which was, "Don't go to Hollywood," was to pretend to panic and say, "I want my nan there." That recording was played on Carson's final episode on May 22, 1992. The oldest surviving video recording of the show is dated November 1962, while the oldest surviving color recording is from April 1964, when Carson interviewed Jack Ehrlich Sr. as his guest. The 30-minute audio recordings of many of the missing episodes are contained in the Library of Congress in the Armed Forces Radio Collection. Many 1970-era episodes have been licensed to distributors that advertise mail-order offers on late-night television, and the later shows that exist in full were stored by Carson in a bomb-proof underground salt mine outside Hutchinson, Kansas. The non-tape archives pertaining to Carson's show are held by the Elkhorn Valley Museum in Carson's hometown of Norfolk, Nebraska. Beginning in 2020, the museum began working with the National Comedy Center to preserve the archives. A large amount of material from Carson's first 2 decades of The Tonight Show, much of it is not seen since it first aired, appeared in half-hour clip compilation syndicated packages known as Carson's Comedy Classics that aired in 1983. Audio clips from the show were featured nightly on WHO-AM in Des Moines, Iowa in the mid-2000s, and in 2014, Turner Classic Movies will begin rerunning select interviews from the program for a new series called Carson on TCM, presented by Conan O'Brien, who of course would host The Tonight Show himself. The digital multicast network Antenna TV acquired rerun rights to whole episodes of the show in August 2015. Unlike the previous clip shows, Antenna TV's airings were full broadcast as they were originally seen. The only edits being removed of The Tonight Show was the name, with the show being renamed simply as Johnny Carson. However, as of January 2018, the broadcast aired opposite the current edition of The Tonight Show in much of the United States, and NBC still owns the trademark of that name, with bumpers, walk-on music, and closing themes being replaced by generic music cues from the Warner Chappell Production Music Library. Most musical guest segments are also removed. Antenna TV aired the show 7 days a week beginning January 1st, 2016, and currently 60-minute episodes air Monday through Friday, and 90-minute episodes air on Saturdays and Saturday nights. Select episodes of Carson's show have also been available on NBC's Peacock streaming service. Shout Factory launched a 24/7 streaming channel devoted to the series in August of 2020, which is distributed through various free over-the-top platforms, including Stir, Eximo, and Pluto TV. Recently, the Roku channel began streaming Johnny Carson TV on its multi-channel platform, Live TV. Jack Parr had often asked Carson to guest host tonight in its earliest years, and reportedly claimed he had been responsible for NBC's selection of Carson in 1962. Steve Allen also utilized guest hosts, including Carson and Ernie Kovacs, particularly after he began hosting The Steve Allen Show in primetime in 1956 and needed to reduce his workload on Tonight. The Tonight Show had guest hosts for entire weeks during Carson's vacations and other nights he had off. Many guest hosts were already larger names in their own rights, including Frank Sinatra, Burt Reynolds, Don Rickles, Tony Danza, Steve Martin, and Woody Allen, who guest hosted 3 times between 1966 and 1971. Impersonalist Rich Little guest hosted 12 times during the 1970s, and Sammy Davis Jr. became the first African American to host a talk show when he guest hosted on November 23, 1964, and then again for a week of shows in August of 1966. Harry Belafonte guest hosted for a week in February of 1968, and among Belafonte's guests were Robert F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr. just months before both men were assassinated. On April 2, 1979, Kermit the Frog was guest host. In addition, many other Muppets appeared for skits and regular segments. Fozzie Bear, Animal, Uncle Deadly, a Vincent Price-inspired Muppet during a segment which included the real Vincent Price, and as mentioned before, Richard Dawson guest hosted 14 times and was considered a full-time replacement should Carson had retired during his 1980 contract dispute with NBC. Carson's contract that took effect in 1981 reduced his workload to 3 nights a week. The permanent guest hosts around that time were Joan Rivers from 1983 to 1986. Then, after about a year, a wide range of guest hosts were used, including Gary Shandling alternating with Jay Leno. Shandling had guest hosted 37 times, who left to focus on his own Showtime show, It's Gary Shandling Show. This left Leno alone as the sole permanent guest host from August 1988 on. Though the concept of using permanent guest hosts were fairly strictly adhered to, occasional illness or some other situations necessitated a substitute guest host, as when David Brenner filled in for Joan Rivers on October 31st and November 1st, 1985, when Rivers' husband, Edgar, was briefly hospitalized. During the show's run, its cast and crew collaborated with a number of NBC sitcoms to produce spoof episodes of The Tonight Show. Those spoofs typically ran in the sitcom's usual spot on the broadcast schedule and featured one of the sitcom's main characters as the guest host. In September of 1983, Joan Rivers was designated Carson's permanent guest host, a role she had been essentially filling for the previous year. In 1986, after years as a guest and 190 total appearances on the show, she left the program for her own show on the newly created Fox network. According to Carson, Rivers never personally informed him of the existence of her show. Rivers, on the other hand, disagreed. In fact, before the announcement was made, Rivers was set to call Johnny to tell her the news. However, Johnny had already been told about the news, and as soon as Rivers called him, he hung up the phone and never spoke to her again. Nevertheless, Rivers' new show was quickly canceled, and she never again appeared on The Tonight Show with Carson, nor did she appear on The Tonight Show with Jay Leno, a band maintained by Leno out of respect for Carson. She also never appeared during Conan O'Brien's 7-month run. After Carson's death in 2005, Rivers told CNN that Carson never forgave her for leaving and never spoke to her again, even after she wrote him a note following the accidental death of Carson's son Ricky in June of 1991. On February 17, 2014, Rivers returned to The Tonight Show as part of a skit in which numerous celebrities paid new host Jimmy Fallon after having lost the bet that he would never become the host of the program. Rivers would later appear on a full-length interview segment on the show on March 27th of that year. As his retirement approached, Carson tried to avoid sentimentality, but would periodically show clips of some of his favorite moments and again invited some of his favorite guests.
Why do you have to do this? Why do you have to quit?
Don't go!
The set, which I assume you're dismantling and setting up at your house. Because it's easier to talk to people like this, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Don't you wish when you had a guest over you could just say, "We're out of time"?
He told his crew everything comes to an end. Nothing lasts forever. 30 years is enough. It's time to get out while you're still working on top of your game, while you're still working well. Carson hosted his penultimate show featuring guest Robin Williams and Bette Midler on May 21st, 1992. The last of Carson's monologue was delivered on this episode and was written by Jim Mulholland, Steve Kunez, and Rick Fournier. Once underway, the atmosphere was electric and Carson was greeted with a sustained 2-minute intense standing ovation. Williams was especially uninhibited with his trademark manic energy and stream-of-consciousness lunacy. Midler was more emotional. When the conversation turned to Johnny's favorite songs, I'll Be Seeing You and Here's That Rainy Day, Midler mentioned that she knew a chorus of the latter. She began singing the song, and after the first time, Carson joined in and turned it into an impromptu duet. Midler finished her appearance from center stage where she slowly sang the pop standard, One for My Baby and One More for the Road. Carson became unexpectedly tearful, and a shot of the two of them were captured by a camera angle from across the set that had never been before used on the show. The audience became tearful as well, and they called the three performers out for a second bow after the taping was completed. This show was immediately recognized as a television classic that Midler considered one of the most emotional moments of her life and eventually won an Emmy for her role in it. Then came the final show on May 22nd, 1992. Carson had no guests on his final episode, which was instead a retrospective show taped by an invitation-only studio audience of family, friends, and crew. During the show, Carson regretted that the first 10 years of his tenure as host no longer exists, saying that he would have loved to show the audience clips of Jane Mansfield with Boris Karloff, Peter Lorre talking to Tallulah Bankhead, and even the first appearance of Bette Midler on the show. More than 50 million people tuned in for the finale, which ended with Carson sitting on a stool alone at center stage, similar to Jack Parr's last show. He said these final words in conclusion.
You people watching, I can only tell you that it has been an honor and a privilege to come into your homes all these years and entertain you. And I hope when I find something that I want to do and I think you will like and come back, that you'll be as gracious inviting me into your home as you have been. I bid you a very heartfelt good night.
And so when it's come to this, I am one of the lucky people in the world. I found something I always wanted to do, and I have enjoyed every single minute of it. I want to thank the gentleman who shared the stage with me for 30 years, Mr. Ed McMahon, Mr. Doc Sepperson, and you people watching. I can only tell you that it's been an honor and a privilege to come into your home after all these years and entertain you. And I hope when I find something that I want to do and I think you will like and come back, that you will be as gracious in inviting me into your home as you have been. I bid you a very heartfelt good night. A few weeks after the final show aired, it was announced that NBC and Carson had struck a deal to develop a new show. Ultimately, however, Carson chose not to return to television. He only gave 2 major interviews after his retirement, one to the Washington Post in 1993 and the other to Esquire magazine in 1992. Carson hinted in his 1993 interview that he did not think he could top what he'd already accomplished. He rarely appeared elsewhere after retiring, providing only a guest voice on the episode of The Simpsons Krusty Gets Cancelled, which included him performing feats of strength and featured Bette Midler as well. Carson's final television appearance was a cameo on the May 13, 1994 episode of The Late Show with David Letterman, where he was handed a copy of his top 10 list and sat in David's chair for a moment. He was prepared to say a few words, but the crowd's cheering was so loud and so sustained that he humorously decided to leave without saying anything, although as he exited, he could be heard saying, "Thank you, good night." In 2005, after Carson's death, it was revealed that he had made a habit of sending jokes to David Letterman via fax machine, which Letterman would then sometimes incorporate into his monologues. The January 31st, 2005 episode of The Late Show, which was featured as a tribute to Carson, began with a monologue by Letterman composed entirely of jokes written by Carson himself after his retirement. In 2011, the last Carson Tonight Show was ranked number 10 on the TV Guide Network special, TV's Most Unforgettable Finales. Johnny Carson's 3-decade tenure as the king of late night was over, and it meant that just like everybody before him, the next person to step into that role had big shoes to fill. And that person was somebody who had been the permanent guest host of The Tonight Show since 1988. But before the first show went on the air, there was a bit of a thing that happened with the other NBC late night host that followed Carson.
Just how pissed off are you? You keep using language like that, and you're going to find yourself out of a job.
Jay Leno was born on April 28, 1950, in New Rochelle, New York. His homemaker mother, Catherine, was born in Greenock, Scotland, and came to the United States at age 11. His father, Angelo, was an insurance salesman born in New York to immigrants from Flumeri, Campania, Italy. Leno grew up in Andover, Massachusetts, and graduated from the Andover High School. He obtained a bachelor's degree in speech therapy from Emerson College in Boston, where he started a comedy club in 1973. His older brother, Patrick, was a Vietnam War veteran who became an attorney. Leno made his first appearance on The Tonight Show on March 2, 1977, performing a comedy routine. During the 1970s, he had minor roles in several TV shows and films, first in the 1976 episode JJ in Trouble of Good Times, and the same year in the pilot of Holmes and Yo-Yo. After an uncredited appearance in 1977's Fun with Dick and Jane, he played more prominent roles in 1978 with American Hot Wax and Silver Bears. His other film and television appearances from that period include Almost Heaven, Going Nowhere on One Day at a Time, Americathon, Polyester, The Wild One on Alice, and both Feminine Mistake and Do the Carmine on Laverne and Shirley. His only starring film role was the 1989 direct-to-video Collision Course with Pat Morita. He also appeared numerous times on Late Night with David Letterman. He also appeared on 3 weeks of the short-lived NBC game show Match Game Hollywood Squares Hour in 1983 and 1984. Starting in 1986, Leno was a regular substitute host for Johnny Carson on The Tonight Show. In 1992, he replaced Carson as host, amid controversy with David Letterman, who had been hosting Late Night with David Letterman since 1982, which aired after The Tonight Show, and whom many, including Carson himself, expected to be Carson's successor. Now, before we continue on with Leno, we need to talk about David Letterman because, obviously, He plays an integral part of the story that I'm about to talk about.
Now, where exactly do I stand? Do I stand like here? Or is it over here? Or is it just a little bit? Is it about? Oh, man, what a program we have slapped together at the last minute for you folks here tonight. Anybody in there? Hello? Hey! Now, the fun officially begins.
David Letterman was born in Indianapolis, Indiana on April 12, 1947, and he had two sisters, one older and one younger. His father, Harry Joseph Letterman, was a florist. His mother, Dorothy Letterman, was a church secretary for the Second Presbyterian Church of Indianapolis and was an occasional figure on Letterman's show, usually at holidays and birthdays. Letterman grew up on the north side of Indianapolis in the Broad Ripple area, about 12 miles from the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. He enjoyed collecting model cars, including racers. In 2000, he told an interviewer for Esquire that while growing up, he admired his father's ability to tell jokes and be the life of a party. Harold Joseph Letterman survived a heart attack at the age of 36 when David was a young boy. The fear of losing his father was consistently with Letterman as he grew up. The elder Letterman died of a second heart attack in 1973 at the age of 57. Letterman attended his hometown Broad Ripples High School and worked as a stock boy at the local Atlas supermarket. According to the Ball State Daily News, he originally wanted to attend Indiana University, but his grades were not good enough, so he instead attended Ball State University in Muncie, Indiana. He is a member of the Sigma Chi fraternity and graduated in 1969 from what was then the Department of Radio and Television. A self-described average student, Letterman later endowed a scholarship for what he called C students at Ball State. Though he'd registered for the draft and passed his physical after graduating from college, he was not drafted for service in Vietnam because he received a draft lottery number of 346 out of 366. Letterman began his broadcasting career as an announcer and newscaster at the college student-run radio station WBST, a 10-watt campus station that is now part of Indiana Public Radio. He was fired for treating classical music with irreverence. He then became involved with the founding of another campus station, WAGGO AM 570, now WCRD 91.3. He credits Paul Dixon, host of The Paul Dixon Show, a Cincinnati-based talk show also shown in Indianapolis, while he was growing up, for inspiring his choice of career. I was just out of college in 1969, and I really didn't know what I wanted to do. And then all of a sudden, I saw him doing it on TV, and I thought, that's really what I wanted to do. Soon after graduating from Ball State in 1969, Letterman began his career as a radio talk show host on WNTS and on Indianapolis television station WLWI, which changed its call sign to WTHR in 1976, as an anchor and weatherman. He received some attention for his novel on-air delivery, which included congratulating a tropical storm for being upgraded to a hurricane, as well as for predicting hailstones the size of canned hams. Letterman also occasionally reported the weather and the day's very high low temperatures from fictitious cities, 8 inches of snow in Bingree and surrounding areas. On another occasion, he riffed that the state border between Indiana and Ohio had been erased, with a satellite map accidentally omitting it, jokingly attributing it to dirty political dealings. The higher-ups have removed the border between Indiana and Ohio, making it one giant state. Personally, I'm against it. I don't know what to do about it. Letterman also starred on a local kiddie show, making wisecracks as the host of a late-night TV show called Freezer-Dried Movies. He once acted out a scene from Godzilla using plastic dinosaurs. And he hosted a talk show that aired on Saturday morning called Clover Power, in which he interviewed 4-H members about their projects. In 1971, Letterman also appeared as a pit road reporter for ABC Sports' coverage of the Indianapolis 500, which was his first nationally telecast appearance. He was introduced initially as Chris Economici, but that was then corrected at the end of the interview. Jim McKay announced his name as David Letterman. Letterman interviewed Mario Andretti, who had just crashed out of the race. In 1975, encouraged by his then-wife Michelle and several of his Sigma Chi fraternity brothers, Letterman moved to Los Angeles, California, with the hopes of becoming a comedy writer. He and Michelle packed up their belongings in his pickup truck and headed out west. As of 2012, he still owned the truck. In Los Angeles, he began performing comedy at the Comedy Store. Jimmy Walker saw him on stage with an endorsement from George Miller. Letterman joined a group of comedians whom Walker hired to write jokes for his stand-up act. A group that at the various times included Jay Leno, Paul Mooney, Robert Schimmel, Richard Jenney, Louis Anderson, Elaine Boozler, Byron Allen, Jack Candy, and Steve O'Derrick. By the summer of 1977, Letterman was a writer and regular on the 6-week summer series The Starland Vocal Band Show, broadcasted on CBS. He also hosted a 1977 pilot for a game show called The Riddlers, which was never picked up. Co-starred in the Barry Levinson produced comedy special Peeping Times, which aired in '78, and later that year, Letterman was a cast member on Mary Tyler Moore's variety show, Mary. He also made guest appearances on Mork and Mindy as a parody of S-leader Werner Erhard, and appearances on game shows such as The $20,000 Pyramid, The Gong Show, Hollywood Squares, Password Plus, Liars Club, as well as the Canadian cooking show Celebrity Cooks. talk shows such as 90 Minutes Live and The Mike Douglas Show. He also screen tested for the lead role in the 1980 film Airplane, a role that eventually went to Robert Hayes. Letterman's brand of dry, sarcastic humor caught the attention of scouts for The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson, and he was soon a regular guest on the show. He became a favorite of Carson and was a regular guest host for the show beginning in 1978. Letterman credits Carson as the person who influenced his career the most. On June 23, 1980, Letterman was given his very own morning comedy show on NBC, The David Letterman Show. It was originally 90 minutes long, but was shortened to 60 minutes in August of 1980. The show was a critical success, winning 2 Emmy Awards, but was a ratings disappointment and was canceled. The last show aired on October 24th of that year. NBC kept Letterman on its payroll to try him in a different time slot. Late Night with David Letterman debuted on February 1st, 1982, the first guest being Bill Murray. Murray went on to become one of Letterman's most recurring guests, guesting on his later CBS show celebration of his 30th anniversary in late-night TV, which aired on January 31st of 2012, and also on the final CBS show in May of 2015. The show ran on Monday through Fridays at 12:30 a.m. immediately following The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. A Friday night broadcast was added later in 1987. It was seen as edgy and unpredictable, and soon developed a cult following, particularly among college students. Letterman's reputation as an acerbic interviewer was born out of verbal sparring matches with Cher, who even called him an asshole on the show.
Because I thought that I would never want to do this show with you.
Now, why? Now, let's explore this a little. Why? Because you thought I was...
an ass.
They're of course not booing, they're just chanting, Cher, Cher. And of course, for you folks at home who may have missed that, what she said was she thought I was an awfully nice guy.
Other people involved included Shirley MacLaine, Charles Grodin, and Madonna, and the show also featured comedy segments and writing characters in a style heavily influenced by the 1950s and 1960s programs of Steve Allen. The show often featured quirky, genre-mocking regular features, including Stupid Pet Tricks, which had origins on Letterman's morning show.
Hammer, the pit bull, and he's bowling. Just lob one into the crowd. Look out! Come on, dancer. Whoa! Up. Yeah! Put him at the foul line. See what he can do there.
Stupid Human Tricks, dropping various objects off the roof of a 5-story building. Demonstrations of unorthodox clothing, such as a suit made of Alka-Seltzer.
Don't try this at home. I know you have the 900-gallon tank. I know you have the oxygen. I know you have the suit of Alka-Seltzer and a staff of 100 people. No!
Velcro and Sweat, a recurring top 10 list, the Monkey Cam, and the Audience Cam, a fictitious letter answering segment, several films by My Dog Bob in which a camera was mounted on Letterman's own dog with comic results, and Small Town News, all of which moved to Letterman with CBS. Other episodes included Letterman using a bullhorn to interrupt a live interview of The Today Show on August 19, 1985, announcing that NBC News President Lawrence Grossman and that he was not wearing any pants. Walking across the hall to Studio 6B, at the time the new studio for WNBC TV, and interrupting Al Roker's weather segments during Live at 5, and staging elevator races complete with commentary by NBC Sports' Bob Costas.
3, 2, 1, ignition.
Ladies and gentlemen, I will describe the scene to you, but I am blinded by the mist. It appears that David Letterman has come out of that mist and has crossed the finish line first.
Here's the shot from the late night sky cam. There we are. Now here it goes, working its way across the studio. Ooh, there's the sky cam operator. Go ahead. Zippy, come on out here, buddy.
In one appearance in 1982, Andy Kaufman, who was wearing a neck brace, appeared with professional wrestler Jerry Lawler, who slapped and knocked the comedian to the ground. They later revealed that the incident was staged.
I think you can use some of those words on TV. I'm not...
With Johnny Carson preparing to call it quits in 1992, the natural belief was that David Letterman was a shoo-in to be Johnny's successor on The Tonight Show. But the truth of the matter was, the decision was already made months before Carson even announced his pending retirement. Buckle up, folks. If you don't know the story already, you're in for a treat. It all began back in February of 1991, when Jay Leno's agent at the time, Helen Kushnick, planted the story in the New York Post that NBC wanted to replace Johnny Carson with upstart rising comedian Jay Leno, who had been the permanent guest host of The Tonight Show since 1988. NBC would later deny the story, and it would be later used as a recurring gag on NBC's David Letterman and also on Saturday Night Live. But little did anybody know that Jay Leno had already secured the permanent host job behind closed doors. What had happened was, shortly after that story was leaked, Letterman had signed a new deal with NBC that was pretty much guaranteed that Jay Leno would become the new host of The Tonight Show the Monday after Carson eventually retires. Nobody could tell anybody about this. Carson couldn't know, Letterman couldn't know, only Warren Littlefield, the president of NBC at the time, John Agolia, the NBC executive at the time, and Bob Wright, the CEO of NBC, Kushnick, and Leno knew. NBC believed that Johnny had only a few more years left to his tenure and had time to prepare for a post-Carson late-night world. That all changed, though, on May 22nd of 1991. With an NBC's fall schedule announcement, Johnny Carson made an unexpected surprise appearance to the affiliates. He told a story and let it slip out that he was leaving The Tonight Show 1 year from now. The announcement reportedly left everybody at NBC scrambling as they had nothing prepared beforehand. Johnny Carson threw a grenade in NBC's plans. Carson would later appear on that night's Late Night with David Letterman to make the announcement public, and Letterman and his crew believed that they were still in play for The Tonight Show, only to be told by Agoria and Littlefield that Letterman would be taking over, and it had already been a done deal, leaving Letterman furious, and without many options to what could be done because he was still under contract through 1993. With late-night television entering a whole new era where a younger generation was taking shape thanks to the rise of Arsenio Hall, NBC was desperate to try to keep Leno and Letterman together, even if Letterman felt like he was being betrayed by the network. While Letterman enlisted the help of super agent Michael Ovitz to plot out his next plan, the Leno transition plan took shape, and on May 25, 1992, the new Tonight Show with Jay Leno debuted on NBC.
Live from the NBC studios in Burbank, California, The Tonight Show with Jay Leno, featuring Branford Marsalis and The Tonight Show Band. Tonight, Jay welcomes Billy Crystal, the music of Shanice, and economic correspondent Robert Krolwich. I'm Ed Hall. And now, Jay Leno.
In 30 years.
Despite Leno landing The Tonight Show, the controversy still continued into Leno's first year, mostly associating with Helen Kushnick, who as the executive producer of the show, had more creative control on how the show would go, no matter how controversial it was. It was clear she had some form of vendetta with Johnny Carson, to the point that on Leno's first show, there was absolutely no tribute to Carson. That was a decision strictly on Kushnick. Kushnick's power over the show went above out of control when, during the 1992 Republican National Convention, a live Tonight Show episode was canceled when Kushnick was so angry that a speech by former President Ronald Reagan went on too long. She sent the audience home 30 minutes before the live show was set to go on the air, leaving NBC furious. A rerun was later aired that night, but it was clear that she was pushing her luck. The final nail in the coffin for Kushnick was 4 months into the new Leno Tonight Show, when she would bar guests appearing on the show if they were appearing on other shows, which led NBC to give Jay and Helen an ultimatum. Either Helen leaves the show, or Jay goes with her. For Jay, the decision was much tougher to handle, as he and Helen were close friends, and Leno had been by her side even at her worst. He eventually decided to cut ties with Kushnick, and she was let go not long after. Once again, it seemed like the dark days were behind for Jay, but unfortunately, if only that was the case, because Letterman was coming back into the fold again. You see, by the end of 1992, Michael Ovitz was able to allow for lenient terms to negotiate with other networks for Letterman, and CBS became a top contender, as they had been trying to get back into the late-night game for years after putting all of its chips in one basket for Pat Sajak back in 1989. Which didn't end out working well. They even tried to offer Jay Leno a late-night show in 1990 with a $6 million payday before he got The Tonight Show. Letterman had a deal with CBS in place, but Letterman was still on the hope that he would get The Tonight Show, especially with rumors of NBC being unhappy with Leno's rating performance as The Tonight Show host. Now, if you've ever read the book The Late Shift, or even saw the movie, you know there's a notable scene in there where Jay Leno supposedly secretly listened into a meeting of NBC executives talking about the future of his job while he was in the broom closet. Supposedly using that as a tactic to keep his job, but again, that's just from the book in general, and we don't know how fabricated that truly is, but I mean, it's not that hard to believe, honestly, when you really think about it. So not too long afterward, NBC did make its final offer to Letterman, which did indeed allow him to get The Tonight Show. Eventually. Sort of. It was a complicated issue. The deal was that NBC would allow Jay Leno to finish out his contract, which ran through May of 1994. And then NBC would give Leno The Tonight Show after that. Keep in mind, though, this was done in January of 1993, so in essential, NBC is giving Jay Leno a year and a half to turn The Tonight Show into a success, and had Letterman agreed to said deal, there was no real guarantee he would get The Tonight Show, and he would be stuck in his current predicament. Letterman wanted to keep his hopes of getting The Tonight Show, but when even his producer and longtime Tonight Show head Peter LaSalle told him that he wouldn't be getting the Johnny Carson Tonight Show, he'd be getting the Jay Leno Tonight Show, and doing to Jay what NBC was doing to him, he really had to think about his choices of what he had to do next. He was still very hesitant to accept the CBS offer, and then he made one final call to Johnny Carson himself and asked Carson what he should do. Carson said he should accept the CBS offer, and thus on January 14th, 1993, the final decision was made.
I spoke to Mr. Carson on Sunday. What did he say? He said, "Stop calling me." Alex and I are playing tennis. Stop bothering me. Yes, there have been points in my life when I have turned to Johnny Carson for advice. And the reason I am standing here, there have been many, many people in my life who have been helpful and supportive and encouraging to me, and I would have to think that the most important figure has been Johnny Carson. The man has been encouraging and helpful to me in ways that he doesn't know I know about. He has, in my career, done things not for any open gratitude or any favors returned. He has been so helpful to me and such a role model for me that I will never be able to repay the kindness to the man.
Yeah, Dave, are you going to kick Jay Leno's ass, and what do you think will happen to Arsenio in the upcoming late night battle?
I'm going to kick your ass. That's what I'm going to do, buddy. Me and Larry, down there, all over you. I got cheap suit, pal. You're dead meat, right, Larry? Take it. You loosen him up, I'll finish him off. You know, it's silly to say things like that, and you probably feel silly now. No, the only kind of strategy we've ever used is we worry about ourselves. We worry about our show. We concentrate on doing the best show we can possibly do, and all of that other stuff seems to take care of itself. I know that it's going to be difficult. I know we have some obstacles. I think our goal, I think everybody up here just it wants us to be competitive. So I would not say we're in business right now to kick anybody's ass.
How do you feel about guests coming on your show for the next few months and bringing up your deal and your move?
I think that we'll grow weary of that pretty soon. I think you folks have grown tired of it already. So I don't see that as a problem.
What about Paul? Did he come along with the deal?
Oh, Paul. What, have you got a little extra for Paul? Or? No, absolutely. Paul Shaffer, I've said this before, Paul Shaffer and the band Night In and Night Out is the best thing about our television program, and I would not have considered any change unless Paul was eager and happy and willing to go with us. Okay, that's about it, eh? Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Nice chatting with you.
And David Letterman would move to CBS at 11:30 to start a new late-night franchise with a 3-year deal worth $14 million, which included ownership of the show and at the time making him one of the richest men in TV history. Jay Leno would stay put as the host of The Tonight Show on NBC, and thus the first official late-night war was underway. David Letterman's last late night was broadcasted on June 25th, 1993, and on August 30th of that year, The Late Show with David Letterman premiered on CBS, and thus the war was on. And believe it or not, David Letterman won it first. For the first 2 years, David Letterman consistently outdid Jay Leno in the ratings, especially considering how CBS was not the biggest rating draw back in the day compared to how it is now. And even the year afterward, when CBS lost the NFL to Fox and a number of CBS affiliates became Fox affiliates, it was a pretty big deal for Letterman to be the success that he was in that time slot. Jay Leno struggled at first, but then came the summer of 1995, where one significant event changed the trajectory of The Tonight Show with Jay Leno forever.
Please welcome, ladies and gentlemen, Hugh Grant.
Let me start with question number 1. What the hell were you thinking? I must say, you know, I admire your honoring the commitment.
Well, the fact is, I owe it to the studio, and the other thing is that although I've never been one to, you know, blow my own trumpet, as they say, I think this is... This is a funny film.
On July 10th, 1995, Hugh Grant appeared in public for the first time after his arrest on lewd conduct charges the previous month. Leno famously asked him, "What the hell were you thinking?" In response, Grant told Leno, "I think you know in life what's a good thing to do and what's a bad thing, and I did a bad thing, and there you have it." The appearance was the first episode in which Leno beat CBS rival David Letterman. That one episode solidified The Tonight Show's rating success going forward, and the show would remain the highest-rated late-night show throughout the course of Leno's tenure. The show follows an established 6-piece format. After the announcer announces the opening credits for the show, the first segment is a 10-minute monologue by Leno with jokes about current events and brief comedy sketches occasionally mixed in. The second segment is a full comedy sketch, such as a mini-documentary by a Tonight Show correspondent, Ross the Intern or Mikey Day, or a trademark of Leno, such as Headlines. The first guest appears, where the interview is divided into 2 segments, then followed by an interview with the second guest in the 5th segment. The 6th and final segment is typically a performance by a musical guest or stand-up comedian. Immediately following the last performance segment, Leno walks on camera to thank the performers, bid farewell to the audience, and recommends watching Late Night, which immediately follows The Tonight Show. As the closing credits roll on screen, the closing theme, composed by band leaders, play the show off the air. Braverett Marcellus was the original band leader of the show from 1992 to 1995, leaving the show after feeling displeased with his role on the show, which he called being an ass-kisser. Kevin Eubanks, who had been the guitarist in Marcellus' band, moved up to bandleader, forming Kevin Eubanks and The Tonight Show Band, and remained with them until 2010. He left to concentrate on his music, adding that his leaving was not provoked by any problems with Leno or NBC. Eubanks would later reunite with Leno as co-host of Leno's version of You Bet Your Life in 2020. Ed Hall served as an announcer on The Tonight Show from 1992 until 2004. He would occasionally appear in sketches during the opening monologue, and the skits often include slapstick injuries to Hall by using a stunt double, dummy, or film clip, such as vehicles running him over in the studio parking lot. Unlike his predecessors on Tonight, Hall did not serve as a sidekick for Leno during his tenure on Leno's incarnation of The Tonight Show. He was controversially replaced in 2004 by The Howard Stern Show's John Melendez, in which many perceived as a thinly veiled attempt to attract a younger demographic and nonsensical, considering his stuttering moniker. The hiring of Melendez was actually carried out by Leno without Stern's knowledge, prompting a rift between Stern and Leno. Stern launched into tirades on the show for many weeks of saying Leno was ripping him off, citing previously lifted material from his show such as jaywalking, ripping off Stern's homeless game, for example, stating to an 18 to 25-year-old male, Jay Leno is gay. He might as well put a dress on. Since the move to the Jay Leno show, Melendez was replaced as announcer but remained on the writing staff. Wally Wingard would be the only off-camera announcer for Letterman's second Tonight tenure, carrying over his duties from the Jay Leno show. Aside from Hugh Grant's notable appearance, the Jay Leno Tonight Show has had a number of other notable moments throughout its history. On May 20th, 1993, the Tonight Show traveled to the Bull and Finch pub in Boston, Massachusetts to celebrate the final episode of Cheers. It's the first time the Tonight Show with Jay Leno was taped on the road. On May 9th of 1994, Bobcat Goldthwait appeared, where he set the guest chair on fire. Leno threw a cup of coffee on there and told Bobcat to sit down in it. Later that August, Leno eulogized his father, who had recently died. After his monologue, Leno sat behind his desk and told the audience about his father's life and how his father had supported him in his career. Leno noted the moment when, upon Carson's disapproval at Leno becoming his successor, his father had encouraged him and told him to fight the good fight. Leno ended the tribute saying, "You know, it is really lonely at the top. You have no idea, but we'll fight the good fight, Pop." On November 30th, 1995, Howard Stern, who had made 2 highly rated appearances in 92 and 93, appeared with bikini-clad porn stars Nikki Tyler and Jamie Lindenmulder to attempt the Tonight Show's first lesbian kiss, encouraging Leno to spank one of them. Stern and the women remained during Siskel and Ebert's segment, which he began to suck one of their toes to raucous applause and behavior from the crowd. Leno was visibly uncomfortable during both segments, reportedly turned Stern, "It will all be edited out," and hastily telling, as revealed by Stern when he went on the air the following morning. Despite the situation, Leno called into the show that morning claiming Stern had gone beyond the acceptable standards. Stern said Leno should not be so uptight and had a real reaction to the situation, which was great. Stern recounted Leno had yelled at his producer, saying Stern had shit in his house. I think that's what it says, but I'm just reading it off of the prompt here. And supposedly grabbed his crotch and yelled, "Pussy, pussy, pussy, that's all it is," with Howard, which Leno denied but agreed he had been angered by Stern. On March 13th of 2000, New York Giants cornerback Jason Sehorn came on stage during Leno's interview with his girlfriend, Law & Order star Angie Harmon, surprising her by proposing in front of Jay, the audience, and musical guest Elton John. Harmon tearfully said yes, and Elton performed after the break. One night later in the monologue, Leno cracked up the audience by saying that the episode was like every date he had in college. The pretty girl ran off with the football player, and I was left alone listening to Elton John.
Please welcome the lovely Angie Harmon.
Yes, I'm dating.
Can I ask you his name? Can I ask you what he does?
No.
Really?
No.
I mean, what if he wanted to come out? If I say his name, let's see if he comes out.
Okay.
Okay. His name is Jason Sehorn. He plays with the New York Giants. Jason, are you there? Keep it, guy. How are you? Good. If you want to,
yeah. Hi, what are you doing?
You marry me.
Oh my God. Baby. Oh.
Look at that ring. Even Elton is jealous. And? Is that a yes? Like last night, sitting there with Angie, it was like my entire high school experience. I'm talking to the most beautiful girl in the room. A football player walks in, steals her away. I end up by myself listening to Elton John. It was the same thing. It was just like high school. Just like high school.
In September of 2000, with California in an energy crisis that forced blackouts, Leno did an episode in the dark using only candles and flashlights known as The Tonight Show Unplugged. Following the September 11th attacks, The Tonight Show was off the air for about a week, as were most similar programs. The first post-9/11 episode began with a still image of an American flag and a subdued opening without the usual opening credits. Leno's monologue paid tribute to those who lost their lives and to firefighters, police, and rescue workers across the U.S. Leno had questioned whether a show that would regularly poke fun at the government could continue after the attacks, but in his monologue, he explained that he also saw the show as a respite from the grim news of the world, akin to a cookie or a glass of lemonade handed to a firefighter. He also told the story about himself as a 12-year-old Boy Scout, which Leno said he was not a very good one to begin with, as dyslexia. His scoutmaster gave him the task of being the cheermaster of the troop, in which Leno told jokes to the troops to keep their spirits up. Senator John McCain and the musical guests Crosby, Stills, and Nash were featured guests. Leno also organized an auction for a Harley-Davidson motorcycle signed by celebrities. He signed his name on stage, with the proceeds going to the 9/11 support organizations. For an extended period after the attack, a short clip of a large American flag waving was shown in between the announcement of the musical guests and Leno's introduction during the opening monologue. On May 12, 2003, Katie Couric hosted The Tonight Show for a day, as Jay Leno had hosted The Today Show earlier in the day. Couric's guests on that night's show were Mike Myers, Simon Cowell, and Robbie Williams. On August 6, 2003, actor Arnold Schwarzenegger appeared on The Tonight Show and confirmed he will be running against California Governor Gray Davis for the 2003 California gubernatorial recall election. Schwarzenegger won that election on October 7th. On January 24, 2005, Leno had a special episode that paid tribute to Tonight Show predecessor Johnny Carson, who had died the day before. During the opening credits, the guests of that show were simply announced using pictures from what they were on Carson's Tonight Show, and the monologue simply gave condolence to Carson. There were no segments used, however. Leno played clips from The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson before commercials. All the guests were people who had worked with Carson and had been on the show, including Ed McMahon, Drew Carey, Don Rickles, and Bob Newhart. On July 20th, 2006, as Colin Farrell was being interviewed by Leno, Farrell's stalker, Desiree Bradford, evaded security, walked on stage as cameras were rolling, confronted Farrell, and threw her book on Leno's desk. In front of a silent, stunned audience, Farrell escorted her off the stage himself, told the camera crew to stop filming, and handed her over to security. As Bradford was led out of the studio, she shouted, "I'll see you in court." Farrell's response was simply, "Darling, you're insane." Outside the studio, NBC security handed her to Burbank police, who eventually released her. While waiting to be filming again, a shocked Leno sarcastically called for a round of applause for NBC security from the audience. After Farrell apologized to the audience, describing Bradford as "my first stalker," the show then continued filming, and the incident was edited out of the broadcast airing that night. Farrell later requested a restraining order in court against Bradford. On July 24, 2007, the monologue was animated with Homer Simpson at the front. Simpson gave a short monologue to the audience and was kicked out by Leno. This was a sketch promoting the Simpsons movie, which was coming out in about 3 days afterwards. On January 2nd, 2008, The Tonight Show, along with Jimmy Kimmel Live and Late Night with Conan O'Brien, returned to air without writers, with the WGA still on strike. It was a response to David Letterman's production company, Worldwide Pants, and CBS Paramount Television, with the WGA to allow Late Show with David Letterman and The Late Late Show with Craig Ferguson to return with writers. Leno's guest that night was Republican presidential candidate Mike Huckabee, who was criticized for crossing the WGA picket line to appear on the show. Huckabee would go on to win the Iowa caucuses the very next day. On June 13, 2008, Leno delivered the news of Tim Russard's death to his audience during his monologue. Tim Russard, of course, was the host of Meet the Press at the time, and set aside some time in it to remember his old colleague. Leno then stated that he would continue the show as normal afterwards. Finally, on March 19, 2009, Barack Obama appeared on the show. It marked the first time that a sitting president of the United States appeared on a late-night talk show. President Obama came under fire for a remark made about the Special Olympics, which he made in reference to Leno's congratulations to Obama's low bowling score. Jay Leno was consistently the most well-known late-night host throughout his original 17-year run, and was a top ratings performer and moneymaker for NBC. But NBC also had other talents in late night that were getting attention from other networks in the early 2000s. And in order for NBC to avoid another repeat of the controversial transition from Johnny Carson to Jay Leno, NBC decided to try to not repeat the same thing with the man who was assigned the next opportunity to host The Tonight Show, who had been a reliable draw of the network ever since his debut in 1993. And their plan was for a much smoother, much more calmer transition this time around. And it worked. NBC didn't have the same controversial transition from one host to another like in 1992. It somehow got even worse than that.
Good luck next week, my friend.
Jay, thank you for everything.
All the best.
Conan O'Brien.
What they've really accomplished in this move is, a peaceful transition of power, which is rare in television.
Conan Christopher O'Brien was born on April 18, 1963 in Brookline, Massachusetts. His father, Thomas Francis, is a physician and professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School, where he specialized in epidemiology. His mother, Ruth, is a retired attorney and former partner at the Boston firm Ropes & Gray. O'Brien has 3 brothers and 2 sisters. O'Brien attended Brookline High School, where he served as the managing editor of the school newspaper, then called the Sagamore. He was a congressional intern for Congressman Robert Drinan and Barney Frank, and in his senior year won the National Council of Teachers of English writing contest with the short story To Bury the Living. After graduating as valedictorian in 1981, O'Brien entered Harvard University. He lived in Holworthy Hall during his first year with future businessman Louis Zubinas and 2 other roommates, and in Mather House during his 3 upper-class years. He majored in history and literature and graduated magna cum laude with a Bachelor's of Arts degree in 1985. O'Brien's senior thesis, entitled Literary Progeria in the Works of William Faulkner and Flannery O'Connor, concerned the use of children as symbols in the roles of William Faulkner and Flannery O'Connor. During college, O'Brien briefly played drums in a band called the Bad Clams and was a writer for the Harvard Lampoon Humor magazine. During his sophomore and junior years, he served as the Lampoon's president, and at the time, O'Brien's future boss on NBC, Jeff Zucker, was serving as the president of the school newspaper, the Harvard Crimson. After graduating from Harvard, O'Brien moved to Los Angeles to join the writing staff of HBO's sketch comedy series Not Necessarily the News, where he worked for 2 seasons. Around this time, he started taking improvisation classes with Cynthia Sigeti and the Groundlings. His next job as a writer was on the short-lived The Wilton North Report. In January of 1988, Saturday Night Live executive producer Lorne Michaels hired O'Brien as a writer. During his 3 years on Saturday Night Live, he wrote such recurring sketches as Mr. Short-Term Memory and The Girl Watchers. The latter was first performed by Tom Hanks and John Lovitz. While on a writer's strike from SNL following the 1987-88 season, O'Brien put on an improvisational comedy review in Chicago with fellow SNL writers Bob Odenkirk and Rob Smigel called Happy Happy Good Show. While living in Chicago, O'Brien briefly shared an apartment with Jeff Garlin near Wrigley Field, and in 1989, O'Brien and his fellow SNL writers received an Emmy Award for Outstanding Writing for a Variety Series. O'Brien, like many SNL writers, occasionally appeared as extras in sketches. His most notable appearance was as a doorman in a sketch in which Tom Hanks was introduced into the SNL Five Timers Club for hosting his 5th episode in 1990. O'Brien and Robert Smigel wrote the television pilot for Look Well starring Adam West, which aired on NBC in 1991. Even with support from NBC president Brandon Tartikoff, the pilot never went to series. Despite the negative reviews, it became a cult hit. In 1991, after the failure of his sitcom, O'Brien also had an engagement to be married fall through, and he quit Saturday Night Live, citing burnout. Mike Reiss and Al Jean, then showrunners on The Simpsons, called O'Brien and offered him a job. The series was prestigious in the writing community at the time. O'Brien recalls everyone wanted to be on that show, but they never hired. O'Brien was one of the first hires after the show's original crew, and with the help of an old Groundlings friend, actress Lisa Kudrow, O'Brien purchased an apartment in Beverly Hills. He and Kudrow became romantically involved as well, and Kudrow believed that he should begin performing rather than writing. O'Brien disagreed, feeling that Kudrow was flattering him, and asserting he was happy as a writer. From 1991 to 1993, O'Brien was a writer and producer for The Simpsons. When O'Brien first arrived at the Fox lot, they temporarily gave him writer Jeff Martin's office. O'Brien was nervous and self-conscious, feeling that he would embarrass himself in front of what he regarded as an intimidating collector of writers. O'Brien would pitch characters in the voices, and he thought that was the norm, until Reese informed him no one does this. He fit in quickly, commanding control of the room frequently. O'Brien wrote some of the show's most acclaimed episodes, Marge vs. the Monorail and Homer Goes to College. The show was initially a higher realistic family sitcom after O'Brien's debut. The show took a rapid shift in the direction of the surreal. O'Brien also had sole writing credits on New Kids on the Block and Treehouse of Horror 4, on which he wrote the episode Wraparounds. Wally Wolodarski described a room character Conan put on for the writers. Conan used to do this thing called the nervous writer that involved him opening a can of Diet Coke and then nervously pitching a joke. He would spray Diet Coke all over himself, and that was always a source of endless amusement among us. During his time at The Simpsons, O'Brien also had a side project working with Smigel on the script for a musical film based off the Hans and Franz sketch from SNL, but the film was never produced. Meanwhile, David Letterman was preparing to leave NBC's Late Night, prompting executive producer Lorne Michaels to search for a new host. Michaels approached O'Brien to produce, then agent Gavin Polone said that O'Brien wanted to perform rather than produce. He arranged with Michaels that O'Brien would do a test audition on the stage of The Tonight Show. Jason Alexander and Mimi Rogers were the guests, and the audience was composed of Simpsons writers. The performance was beamed by satellite to NBC, where Lorne Michaels and NBC executives watched.
I like how models do that all the time, because it is physically very hard work.
It's not that bad.
You've done a lot, okay.
I've done a lot of catalog stuff, mostly.
See, it is hard work, long hours.
No, it seems, like it would be hard. No, it doesn't. People always say that. People always say it's tough to be like a model. No, like turning a big crank is tough.
I'm not talking about that.
It is. First of all, again, thank you for coming.
How could I miss an opportunity like this?
It's not often you get to share camera time with me.
There you go.
That's the end of my mock show. If that's all I ever get, it was a lot of fun. I had a good time. Thank you very much. Good night.
The audition was not well received by media commentators, citing his awkward humor. O'Brien was picked up as the new host on April 26, 1993.
Just found out about this. The gentleman who is a writer on Saturday Night Live, won an Emmy. Right, won an Emmy on Saturday Night Live. Works on The Simpsons. Lorne Michaels, who you know from Saturday Night Live, will be producing the show. And I thought, come by.
Known to the public. And O'Brien himself wrote a self-deprecating New York Times piece titled O'Brien Flops on the day of the show's premiere. Critics attacked O'Brien. Tom Shales suggested that the host resumed his previous identity, Conan Oblivion. Generally, critics viewed O'Brien as nervous and fidgety on camera, and that he was way too smart, too East Coast, too sophisticated, too young, and even too tall to be successful. The show was consistently at risk for getting canceled. At one low point in 1994, NBC threatened to put him on a week-to-week contract. Executives were anxious to replace him with Greg Kinnear, who followed O'Brien with Later at 1:30. Interns filled empty seats in the audience when affiliates began to inquire about replacement hosts. In one installment after a short stretch of reruns, sidekick Andy Richter described his vacation activities as follows. I sat back and reminded myself what it's like to be unemployed. The in-joke alluded to the rumors floating in the trades that NBC was near canceling the program. Late Night under O'Brien slowly but steadily acquired commercial and critical success. Sketches grew in popularity, such as If They Made It, Desk Drive, and In the Year 2000. A reliable staple involved a TV screen lowered behind O'Brien's desk and displaying a still photo of a news figure. The lips and voices of these characters, Clutch Cargo, features a party-crazed hillbilly interpretation of Bill Clinton, which was supplied by writing partner Robert Smigel. The turning point for the show was David Letterman's February 1994 appearance. O'Brien said it was a morale boost. I'm thinking, if the guy who created the 12:30 thing comes on and says we're smart and funny, let's go. The show went through a wobble in January 1995 when Robert Smigel, feeling burnt out, quit as a head writer. An increase in quality over time, perceived by some observers, was something credited to a growth in O'Brien's comedic performance. Within a year, the comedic formula began to arise. The show would combine the lewd and wacky with more elegant narrative-driven remotes. One famous remote was when Conan visited an historic Civil War-era baseball league. The piece was one of O'Brien's personal favorites, later remarking, "When I leave this earth at the funeral, just show this because this pretty much says who I'm all about." O'Brien's audience grew steadily as the show began to best competitors in the ratings and continued to do so for 15 seasons. In the early days of the internet, fans launched unofficial websites compiling precise summaries of each episode. Even Tom Shales was a convert. He called the show one of the most amazing transformations in television history. Beginning in 1996, O'Brien and the Late Night Writing Team were nominated annually at the Emmy Awards for Best Writing in a Comedy Series, winning the award for the first and only time in 2007. In 1997, 2000, 2002, 2003, and 2004, the writing staff won the Writers Guild Award for Best Writing in a Comedy Variety Series, and in 2001, he formed his own TV company called Conaco, which subsequently shared in the production credits for Late Night. That same year, he returned to host Saturday Night Live during its 26th season. As of October 2005, Late Night with Conan O'Brien had 11 years consistently attracting an audience averaging around 2.5 million viewers. In 2006, O'Brien exploited his personal resemblance to Taraj Hanlon, entering her second term as the president of Finland. Capitalizing on the resemblance and on the 2006 Finnish presidential election, O'Brien and Late Night aired mock political ads both in support of Halonen and against her main opponent, Sauli Niinistö, who influenced popular perception of the race, which Halonen eventually won. O'Brien traveled to Finland shortly after the election. We took the show to Helsinki for 5 days, where we were embraced like a national treasure. As part of the 5-day trip, which was released as a 1-hour special episode of Late Night, O'Brien met with Hanlon at the Finnish presidential palace. During the writer's strike in 2008, O'Brien staged a mock feud with Comedy Central's Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert over a dispute about which of the three were responsible for giving a bump to Mike Huckabee's campaign to become the Republican presidential nominee. The feud crossed over with all three shows during the 2007-2008 Writers Guild strike. Near the turn of the millennium, NBC's late-night lineup, Leno at 11:30 and O'Brien at 12:35, as well as Saturday Night Live on the weekends, remained a leader in the ratings. By 2001, O'Brien's contract at NBC had less than a year left to run, and despite arguably coming into his own in the preceding years, the network was reluctant to pay him on the same scale as other late-night hosts. That year, competing network Fox mounted an extended, comprehensive campaign to lure O'Brien away from NBC, signing his appeal for a younger late-night demographic. The head of News Corporation, Peter Chernin, persuaded O'Brien personally, taking him and executive producer Jeff Ross to dinner on several occasions. Fox plan involved making O'Brien the network's signature star. His program would begin 30 minutes before Leno and Letterman's, and he would be receiving cross-promotion via its animation programming block and on Sunday NFL games. Chernin also offered the host 7 times his current pay, a jump from $3 million to $21 million. Ross, friends with NBC president and CEO Jeff Zucker, informed him that Fox was aggressively pursuing O'Brien. NBC returned with a more realistic offer, bumping up O'Brien's salary to $8 million and renewing him through 2005. While many of O'Brien's professional advisors and managers pushed for the Fox deal, O'Brien decided to possibly take over The Tonight Show after Leno made it a difficult decision. O'Brien, like many comedians, had grown up idolizing Carson's incarnation. Numerous NBC executives, including President Bob Wright, were optimistic that O'Brien would stay despite other networks being interested in signing him. Chernin warned O'Brien that waiting along for Leno to leave would be destructive to his late-night TV career. Nevertheless, O'Brien signed a new deal with NBC in March of 2002. The contract extended him through 2005 and most significantly contained a clause that solidified the official line of succession. If anything were to happen to Leno, O'Brien would step in. O'Brien successfully hosted the 2002 Emmy Awards, sending out the most resounding message yet about his growing strength as a performer, and a year later, NBC broadcast O'Brien's 10th anniversary special in primetime. By the time Leno's contract again came up for renewal, a decision would need to be made regarding the future of The Tonight Show. Facing the prospect of attempting to keep both Lennon and O'Brien, Zucker made the final call on Leno's deal, deciding that this contract extension would be Leno's final. The plan would extend Leno for 4 additional years, after which he would give The Tonight Show to O'Brien. In February of 2004, NBC executive Mark Graboff informed Ross of the conversations, and he in turn ran with the idea of waiting for 4 more years for O'Brien, who was immediately receptive. Zucker, along with top late-night executives Rick Ludwin, met with Leno in March at its Burbank studio to discuss the contract extensions, and explained that NBC's stance on handing over the show to O'Brien. While Leno quietly felt both disappointed and befuddled, he noted that he did not want to see himself and O'Brien go through the same dilemma that he and Letterman faced 12 years earlier, and agreed to the plans. His only request was that NBC wait to announce O'Brien as host until well after the extension was signed, to which the executives agreed. When Leno handed the news professionally to the relief Zucker, he soon headed to Tonight Show's producer Debbie Vicker's office to let him know he felt as if he had just been fired. NBC's announcement of the renewal inevitably led to press speculation about O'Brien's fate. To that end, O'Brien and his team went from the charade, peppering interviews with unclear, vague statements about his future. Finally, on September 27, 2004, O'Brien officially signed on to become the next host of The Tonight Show. NBC allowed the first comment aside from the press release to come from Leno on that night's show.
Welcome back. I want to elaborate on an announcement made earlier today. You may have heard about this, that I'm going to leave the show in 2009. Okay. All right. No, let me explain. Let me explain how these things work. About 6 months ago, I sat down here with the folks at NBC, and they said, we want to re-up. And I said, okay, what do you want to do? Because I don't have a manager and agent. I like the people I work with. They're nice folks. And they said, and this is a high-paying job. Oh, it's a great paying job. So they said, listen, we would like to do 5 more years. I said, great. I'd love to do 5 more years. And that was 6 months ago. And then time went by. There's all talk about Conan O'Brien. Will he go to ABC? Will he go to one of these other networks? And they came to me and they said, we don't want to lose Conan O'Brien. And I said, oh, okay, what does that mean? And they said, we think Conan would be a good replacement, as I do. Conan is a gentleman, funny, the hottest late-night guy out there, excellent.
And I said, you know something? I don't want to see Conan go anywhere else. And I'm proud to say this show has been #1. We will keep it #1. And then in 2009, I'll say, Conan, take it over. It's yours. Because, you know, when I took this show over, boy, there was a lot of animosity between me and Dave and who's going to get it. And quite frankly, a lot of what I thought, well, good friendships were permanently damaged. And I don't want to see anybody ever have to go through that again. Because this, you know, this show is like a dynasty. You hold it, and then you hand it off to the next person. And I don't want to see all the fighting and all, and who's better, and nasty things back and forth in the press. So right now, here it is. Conan, it's yours. See you in 5 years, buddy. Okay.
Remember this. This will come into play later. In private conversations, Leno likened his removal from The Tonight Show to the end of a relationship, noting that he was loyal and still ended up heartbroken. From his perspective, NBC's decision made no sense, as the show had remained #1 in the ratings and consistently brought in money. He began frequently lamenting his confusion to producer Vickers, explaining that he was sick of lying when people inquired about his retirement. Eventually, Leno began mulling over his own options after Tonight, telling his staff that after the transition, they could move the show to another network like ABC, whose Disney lot was not too far away from then their current Burbank studio. His frustration with the situation came across in his nightly monologues, as more jokes regarding NBC's fourth-place position in the ratings, as well as jokes regarding the future transition, began to appear. While NBC executives tended to not worry in the immediate years following the decision, by 2007, Zucker began to ponder what losing Leno might mean for the network. Around the time, Fox and ABC began conveying interest in holding discreet conversations with Leno. Among the offers made to Leno by NBC's competitors was from Sony Pictures for a syndicated program. In early 2008, Zucker began to make trips to the Burbank studios in an effort to keep Leno. He gave him numerous suggestions, including a Bob Hope-type deal with high-profile specials, a Sunday night primetime show, and even a nightly cable show on USA Network. Executives began to entertain an ideal situation, paying off O'Brien and retaining Leno, but Zucker viewed that idea as outrageous. By the time NBC had already broken ground on a new studio for O'Brien's Tonight Show, renovating Stage 1 at the Universal Studios lot in Universal City for $50 million. During a spring lunch meeting with Ross, NBC Sports chair Dick Ebersol advised that O'Brien retire silly antics and focus more on pitching the show to Middle America, which would involve stretching out his monologue. O'Brien, then a year away from inheriting The Tonight Show, was indeed lengthening his monologue, but viewers suggested from Lugwin as largely unnecessary, desiring to put his own stamp on the show's tradition. By this point, O'Brien's high popularity at the time on the contract signing had gone down slightly. He'd opted not to change his act to suit a more mainstream audience that NBC imagined he would. And CBS's Craig Ferguson, who occurred the post-Letterman slot as the host of The Late Late Show, had begun to occasionally beat O'Brien in overall ratings. Though internal anxiety increased among executives, most tended to still support O'Brien. Zucker's last resort for Leno was a nightly 10 p.m. program. He imagined a nightly Leno show in that time slot could perhaps turn around NBC's primetime ratings decline. On December 8, 2008, Leno verbally agreed to stay at the network, producing a nightly 10 p.m. variety show titled The Jay Leno Show, and phoned ABC and Fox to inform them. Zucker and Leno planned to meet with O'Brien later to explain the deal, but as word leaked out to the New York Times, they decided to meet with him directly following that night show. Following that meeting, Ross and O'Brien met with writers and mulled over the decision. O'Brien instantly felt uneasy, but as he was still in essence receiving The Tonight Show, he remained calm. The final episode of Late Night with Conan O'Brien aired on February 20th, 2009, followed by The Tonight Show with Jay Leno on May 29th. Most of O'Brien's entire staff moved cross-country to Los Angeles to prepare his version of The Tonight Show. He and his staff threw themselves into developing the program, but remained concerned regarding NBC's commitment to the new Tonight Show's incarnation. Meanwhile, senior-level executives at NBC predicted that Leno's show would be roundly beaten by hour-long dramas on competing networks and cable, dooming the network's experiment. In announcing his 10 p.m. show on The Tonight Show, Leno said, "People are asking me, what are you going to do about the last show? Are you going to go on vacation? This kind of stuff. Actually, I'm going to a secluded spot where no one can find me. NBC Primetime. As most of you know, we're not really leaving. We're coming back at 10 o'clock in September. It's a gamble. It's a gamble. I'm betting everything that NBC will still be around in 3 months. That is not a given."
I'd like to say something about Mr. Jay Leno. Jay Leno is, from day one, has called me constantly and offered his support. Every night at the end of The Tonight Show, Jay Leno says, "Stay tuned for Conan O'Brien." He has done that since 1993. I owe that man a great deal, and so my thanks to Jay Leno for all he's done for me.
The Tonight Show with Conan O'Brien premiered on June 1st, 2009. The show's opening began with a nod to The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson, beginning with the classic Laramie Peacock logo used during the 1960s and 1970s, and the announcement that the following program is brought to you in living color on NBC. In the cold open, O'Brien was shown preparing to host his first episode of The Tonight Show, going over a list of things that needed to be done, but realizing he was still in New York and had forgotten that they needed to move to Los Angeles. After trying and failing to catch a taxi cab, Conan ran across the country through such places as Amish Country, Wrigley Field in Chicago, the Gateway Arch in St. Louis, the Teton Range in Las Vegas, and the deserts of Arizona before arriving at Universal Studios Hollywood to host the show. Upon arrival, Conan realizes he left his keys to the new studios in New York and then drove a bulldozer through the door and the wall of the studio to get in. The Cheap Trick song Surrender was played over the sketch. Other film sketches in the first episode included a trip through the streets of Los Angeles on the Universal Studios tram, a ride through Hollywood with Conan behind the wheels of his 1992 Ford Taurus show, and a short gag showing Conan in the back row of a Los Angeles Lakers playoff game at Staples Center. On June 23, 2009, the show's first segment ended with a tribute to former Tonight Show announcer and sidekick Ed McMahon, who had died earlier in the day. On September 23, 2009, during his opening monologue, O'Brien told a very brief joke about Newark and a supposed healthcare program for the city's citizens that would involve Newark giving them a bus ticket out of the city. Newark Mayor Cory Booker responded in a satirical YouTube video calling for O'Brien to apologize and that Conan would be banned from ever entering Newark Liberty International Airport until doing so. Conan responded by further making fun of Newark, however, saying that the only way he can get to Newark now would be like everyone else, through a series of poor decisions. He also called out Cory Booker to come on the show to air out their grievances, deciding to then ban Booker from Burbank Airport, adding later that he had absolutely no power to do so. Booker subsequently banned Conan from the state of New Jersey as well as the sister cities of Newark. In response, O'Brien read a letter on the air from Elizabeth, New Jersey Mayor Chris Bolwich, declaring that he would temporarily rename Terminal A of Newark Liberty the Conan O'Brien Terminal. Conan continued, saying that he would create a geographical toilet seat around Newark. The mayor of Bayonne, East Orange, Kearny, Jersey City, and Elizabeth had publicly sided with Conan O'Brien. He then said, "Your move, Mayor Booker." The feud was unofficially ended when Secretary of State Hillary Clinton called for it to end during a prepared comedy bit, telling Booker to chalk it up to Conan. The following week, Conan announced that Cory Booker would be a guest on the October 16, 2009 show to mend the feud. That night, O'Brien and his wife donated $50,000 to the New York Now organization, and NBCUniversal matched Conan's donation to a total of a $100,000 gift. Booker also admitted that he is a big Conan fan and often tapes shows to watch the next day or watches them on the website Hulu. On September 25, 2009, O'Brien suffered from a mild concussion after he slipped and hit his head while running a race, as part of a comedy sketch with guest Terry Hatcher. He was examined at a hospital and released the same day. A rerun was aired that night, but O'Brien returned to work the following Monday and poked fun of the incident before showing a clip of the occurrence in its entirety. The episode was never completed. Second guest Seth MacFarlane and musical guest Rodrigo Gabriela returned for the next week's shows.
It's the Jay Leno Show!
On September 14, 2009, The Jay Leno Show premiered at 10 p.m. The Jay Leno Show was met with mixed reception from critics who felt that the show had little differentiation from Leno's Tonight Show. Others were critical of NBC's decision to give up an hour of its weeknight lineup to Leno, due to the network's past success with dramas airing in the 10 p.m. time slot. One NBC affiliate notably planned not to air the show at all, although the decision was retracted due to complaints by the network. Although viewership of The Jay Leno Show was initially on par with NBC's projections by November, the program's ratings began to fall significantly. NBC affiliates complained that the declining viewership of The Jay Leno Show also had a ripple effect on the viewership of their late local newscasts. Ratings for NBC affiliate local news broadcasts at 11 p.m. began to slip by mid-October, especially on NBC-owned and operated stations in the largest markets, creating high anxiety for the network. The Tonight Show still retained a slightly higher share of the coveted 18 to 34 demographic against Letterman, but saw those numbers slip even more when Jay Leno's show began. Affiliates began to complain, and in addition to the domino effect on the local news, O'Brien and his 12:30 successor, Jimmy Fallon, the disastrous ratings for NBC and its existing primetime lineups came from Leno. This cascading effect caused by the lower 10 p.m. lead-in was so significant that local NBC affiliate news viewership fell an average of 25% nationwide, with a decline in some markets being as high as 50%. By November, 2 months after the debut of The Jay Leno Show, ratings for The Tonight Show were brought down to roughly 2 million viewers a night year to year, from when Leno had hosted the program. Clearing the 10 p.m. time period for Leno also damaged relationships with the producers of scripted shows that previously occurred the slot, such as Dick Wolf of Law & Order. Leno offered an October 29th interview to Broadcasting and Cable, where he stated that he would return to his original 11:35 time slot if offered by NBC. When O'Brien's sidekick and announcer Andy Richter called the move less than classy in a chat with TV Squad, Leno called Ludwig to complain.
And, and there was all kinds of talk about our ratings not being very good, but they were pretty good all summer.
Sure.
And then our lead-in changed.
Right.
And they weren't so good anymore.
It's very hard, I would think, to have a lead-in for a nighttime talk show that is a nighttime talk show.
Yes.
As most programs went into repeats in December, Leno's staff, notably Vickers, had focused on grabbing big-name guests for that month in an effort to save the Jay Leno Show. Those efforts were cut short when she was informed they had until the end of November. Affiliates began calling the network to inquire about the show's fate, and research analysis revealed O'Brien's drastically reduced median age for The Tonight Show, age 56 to 46, could possibly reflect that he was too niche for the earlier time. Any effort to take Leno off the air was halted by his contract, which had a highly unusual pay-or-play provision, in contrast to the typical pay-or-play agreement, which guaranteed NBC would both air his program and pay him up to 2 years. On November 6, NBC Chairman Jeff Gaspin received an email from the sales division with a suggestion to cancel O'Brien and reinstate Leno as the host of The Tonight Show. Upon Gaspin's legal interpretation of Leno's contract, the option to simply move Leno back to The Tonight Show became relevant. When very poor ratings came in for the November sweeps period, affiliates became alarmed and NBC board members demanded something be done regarding the 10 p.m. lead-in. If something was not done by January, the affiliates reasoned they would instate syndicated programming or move up their news broadcast to pre up the Jay Leno Show. Ludwig, Gaspin, and Zucker kicked around possible suggestions for the dilemma, such as cutting Leno to a few nights per week. In an attempt to alienate the situation, Vickers moved the most popular comedy segments to the second half of the Jay Leno Show, moving the 10 at 10 segments later in the broadcast. Gaspin appeared suggesting to put Leno back at 11:35 and soon began working on a plan to cut the Jay Leno Show to a half hour, leading into Conan's Tonight Show around midnight. From their perspective, the biggest casualty in the scenario would be Late Night with Jimmy Fallon, which would get bumped to 1 a.m. The reconfigured lineup could start in March of 2010 following NBC's coverage of the Winter Olympics. Zucker preferred a plan for Leno to include an occasional guest and comedy piece, while Ebersol favored returning the way it was before, with Leno at 11:35 and O'Brien at 12:35. Gaspin laid out his plan to Zucker 1 week before Christmas, but both agreed to wait it out for the new year, as to not ruin anybody's holiday season. The plan moved forward after confirmation that O'Brien's contract did not guarantee a strict 11:35 start time, a loophole included primarily to accommodate sports preemptions and specials, such as the network's New Year's coverage. Gaspin planned to disclose the news to Leno first, and then, if all went well, inform O'Brien the following week. When Gaspin laid out the proposal to Leno and Vickers, the response was positive, even though they questioned how such a plan would work. Gaspin reasoned that the company was in a desperate situation, and he indicated his confidence in O'Brien that he would go along with the changes too. While Leno embraced the plan, Vickers was unnerved. Without a guest or musical act, she might not even have a studio audience, which could have disastrous consequences for Leno. In order to meet with O'Brien the following Monday, Gaspin was forced to cancel a meeting with the affiliate board, but promised them that by doing so, he would have an answer to the 10 p.m. problem that would be satisfactory to the board. After his January 6th show, O'Brien met with manager Gavin Pallone to share his anxieties regarding the ratings. "I just think Leno is going to hurt me in some way." News regarding Leno leaked to pop culture site FTV Live by the following morning, which was then picked up by national publications, including the Los Angeles Times and the New York Times. Gaspin scheduled an immediate meeting with Ross and O'Brien as soon as they arrived and explained the proposed changes. "I know how hard I've worked for this," responded O'Brien. "It was promised to me. I had a shitty lead-in." Following the tense 15-minute meeting, O'Brien and Ross returned to the Tonight Studios. TMZ reported on the story with a headline reading, "NBC Shakeup, Jay Leno comes out on top." O'Brien called an emergency staff meeting and assured that they had not been canceled and all would be fine. The TMZ story deeply bothered O'Brien, owing to its timing soon after a story reporting the Jay Leno Show's cancellation, and he and Ross reasoned that they indeed were the last to be told of the changes. By the following morning, O'Brien and Ross determined that they would have to leave NBC, and O'Brien opened that night's show with, "We've got a great show for you tonight. I have no idea when it will air, but it's going to be a pretty great show. Fallon viewed the move as a reactionary one by Zucker, concluding that he was acting in self-preservation, since network owner General Electric was in the process of negotiating the acquisition of NBCUniversal by Comcast. When a story ran that night on the New York Times website that Fox had an overt interest in O'Brien and was not going along with the plan, Zucker reasoned that Fallon was to blame. The situation became heated when Zucker placed a call to O'Brien's agent Rick Rosen, inquiring on the story and demanding an immediate answer from the O'Brien camp. Gaspin spoke about the situation at a previously scheduled press conference that Sunday, noting that, "I obviously couldn't satisfy either with 100% of what they wanted. That's why I came up with this compromise." Zucker, upon hearing that O'Brien still did not take the proposal well, threatened Rosen, saying, "I'm going to tell you right now that I can pay him or play him. I can ice you guys." On the following Monday's show, O'Brien continued jokes on the subject, responding to thunderous applause. He joked, "You keep that up and this monologue won't start until 12:05. Rosen suggested that O'Brien's camp hire litigation lawyer Patty Glazer to help grasp the situation. Following discussions on Leno's contract during a post-show conference, Glazer turned her attention to O'Brien for his opinion. He expressed his desire to write a statement describing his feelings on the matter, and after hearing what he would possibly say in such a statement, Glazer agreed to the idea, although Ross was initially reluctant. O'Brien went without sleep that night, crafting his statement obsessively. He returned to the studio the following morning, listening as the lawyers and Glazer read over the statement, which remained largely unchanged before publication. According to the book The War for Late Night, Glazer found the statement as ideal for their purposes. It laid out Conan's point of view unequivocally, but without compromising his legal options. Nothing in there overtly said he was quitting, saying that he could not be accused of forsaking his contractual obligations. O'Brien's press release went out midday on January 12, 2010, which he addressed to People of Earth. For 60 years, The Tonight Show was aired immediately following the late local news. I sincerely believe that delaying The Tonight Show into the next day to accommodate another comedy program will seriously damage what I consider to be the greatest franchise in the history of broadcasting. The Tonight Show at 12:05 simply isn't The Tonight Show. So it has come to this. I cannot express in words how much I enjoy hosting this program and what an enormous personal disappointment it is for me to consider losing it. My staff and I have worked unbelievably hard, and we are very proud of our contribution to the legacy of The Tonight Show. But I cannot participate in what I honestly believe in its destruction.
You think Conan will go for that? Yes. Yes.
You want me to move The Tonight Show to 12:05? Forget it. I'm not doing it. Go to hell!
Public and media reaction to the press release was positive, with the New York Times stating O'Brien held Leno personally responsible for the conflict. According to The War for Late Night, the People of Earth letter, the manifesto as NBC came to call it, changed the tone. This wasn't just Conan saying no, it was Conan saying no, and you're wrong, and by the way, go fuck yourself. A turning point in the conflict came on January 13th as O'Brien joked in his monologue.
Hosting The Tonight Show has been the fulfillment of a lifelong dream for me. And I just want to say to the kids out there watching, you can do anything you want in life. Yeah, unless Jay Leno wants to do it too.
Following the joke, Leno called Gaspin asking, "Why the fuck am I giving up a half hour for this guy?" Conversations changed the focus on what O'Brien would require to resolve the matter, and parties began to discuss a settlement. Discussions neared completion regarding a financial settlement by January 14th and were expected to be in place following O'Brien's final week of shows during the week of January 18th, a concession O'Brien pushed to give his program a proper farewell. Movement on the settlement slowed when run by GE executives, then owners of NBCUniversal. NBC had several requests, among those he not bring Howard Stern on the show his final week, and that they see the show's final week of scripts. Talks for much of the rest of the week went nowhere, and a Saturday New York Post story ran claiming that O'Brien's staff felt betrayed by his actions, as they did not understand his refusal to accept the 12:05 time slot in order to keep the jobs and was driven by egocentric concerns. O'Brien was infuriated by the story, which he assumed to be a direct plan from NBC, as nearly all the staff agreed that he should leave the network. He was personally appalled that NBC challenged his character, as stressing severance for his employees was enormously important to him. He had paid them out of his own pocket during the writer's strike 3 years earlier. NBC added more requests, which the O'Brien camp refused as unreasonable, such as the right to pull any of his final shows if the network objected to the content. GE Chairman Jeffrey Immelt questioned why they were paying so much for a performer destined to run to another network. Negotiations continued into O'Brien's final week. He could not confirm on air it was indeed his final week of shows, which produced difficulties in booking the guests he desired for his final show. On January 19th, multiple media outlets reported that O'Brien and NBC were close to signing a deal between $30 and $40 million for the host to walk away from the network. Following the January 20th episode, O'Brien remained at the studio until the early morning hours alongside executive producer Jeff Frost and the legal counsel trying to finalize the settlement. O'Brien wandered off, playing his guitar alone and stepping out into the deserted Universal lot at midnight, attempting to make sense of the situation. O'Brien signed the agreement that night, and the next day, its terms were made public. In all, O'Brien will receive a $45 million deal to leave NBC. He received pay for the remaining 2 years of his contract, with additional payments to Ross, Richter, and Weinberg. The severance pay for his staff was around $12 million, which O'Brien had stressed. O'Brien paid around 50 stagehands and various crew members at least 6 weeks severance pay out of his own pocket, and NBC gave those particular staffers nothing in the settlement. The International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees stated that they were very happy with how O'Brien treated the union members during the conflict. The contract contained a clause prohibiting O'Brien from making negative remarks about NBC for a certain amount of time. It did not, however, contain the previously rumored mitigation clause, in which NBC would be able to keep some of the severance package after O'Brien found a new network. It stipulated that he could not return to television on another network no earlier than September 1st of 2010. The conflict only provided more comedy material for O'Brien's Tonight Show during its final episodes. Among other bits, O'Brien put the show up for sale on Craigslist and then himself. Looking back at clips from the show's 7-month tenure that were dubbed classic Tonight Show moments, and designed a bit to seem as though he was spending absurd amounts of NBC's money, such as customizing a Bugatti Veyron, playing audio and video clips with expensive rebroadcasting rights, and using a purported rare ground sloth to display beluga caviar on what was presented as an original Picasso. Because the segment aired in days immediately following the 2010 Haiti earthquake, while national fundraising efforts, including some spearheaded by NBC, were ongoing, O'Brien received criticism for wasting resources. In response to the outcry over the expense of those sketches, O'Brien explained that the segments were indeed jokes, and many of the props were either counterfeits or borrowed in exchange for promotional consideration. The guest roster for O'Brien's final show on January 22nd included Tom Hanks, Steve Carell, who did an exit interview of O'Brien in character as an NBC employee and shredded Conan's ID badge, and his original first guest, Will Ferrell, was regarded by O'Brien as a dream lineup. In addition, Neil Young performed his song, Long May You Run, and as the show closed, was joined by O'Brien, Beck, Ferrell, and dressed as Ronnie Van Zant, Billy Gibbons, Ben Harper, Vivica Paulin, and the Tonight Show Band to perform the Leonard Skinner song, Freebird. In his final moments on the air, O'Brien stated that between Saturday Night Live, Late Night, and The Tonight Show, he had worked for NBC for over 20 years, and he was enormously proud of the work that they had done together. He then thanked NBC for the first time since announcing his intention to quit. O'Brien said his decision was the hardest thing he ever had to do. He praised and gave thanks to staff and thanked his fans for their overwhelming support, especially those who participated in the Los Angeles rallies during periods of heavy rain. He ended the show by offering heartfelt advice to his viewers in his farewell address, stating, "All I ask of you is one thing. I ask this particularly of the young people who watch. Please don't be cynical. I hate cynicism. For the record, it's my least favorite quality, and it doesn't lead anywhere. Nobody in life gets exactly what they thought they were going to get. But if you work really hard and you're kind, amazing things will happen. I'm telling you, amazing things will happen." Following the taping, the studio set was used one final time for a party thrown by staff. O'Brien's monologue spot from the floor was framed and signed by his staff as a gift, which touched O'Brien. 10.3 million people watched the final episode of The Tonight Show with Conan O'Brien, a notably high number for live late-night viewing and on a Friday night. The final episode scored a 7.0 household rating and a 4.4 rating in the 1849 demographic. Not only did O'Brien's final show beat all late-night competition, it outscored all primetime shows in the 18 to 49 demo for that night and the night before. The network confirmed that Leno would officially resume as host of The Tonight Show on March 1st, and reruns from O'Brien's time as host aired on NBC until they began airing the Winter Olympics on February 15th.
It's The Tonight Show with Jay Leno.
I'm Jay Leno, your host, at least for a while. So, gotta admit, I'm a little bit nervous. Not because it's my first night back, because I know Dave and Oprah are watching.
That's right, man.
Leno's first Tonight Show back pulled in 6.6 million viewers, and his margin over Letterman again held for much of the rest of his run until his second Tonight Show departure 4 years later. While his numbers were down from his original incarnation of The Tonight Show, it's as if a collective erase button was pushed, said Robert Thompson, professor of television at Syracuse University, with the usual suspects back in their usual locations, except Conan is gone. According to NBC, if O'Brien continued hosting, it would have been the first year that The Tonight Show would have actually lost money, which Leno later contended was damaging to the franchise. This assertion was scorned by skeptical critics, as it was calculated that Conan's Tonight Show would have made significantly more money in advertising than Leno's show did, due to its more favorable youth demographic numbers. In addition, higher production costs and higher salaries would have by all accounts made Leno's Tonight Show more costly. O'Brien and Ross also challenged that notion, concluding that to arrive at such a calculation, NBC must have included the cost of building up the new studio and offices as well as startup costs. At NBC, most young executives tended to support O'Brien and joined the I'm with Coco Facebook groups. NBC later asked all employees to rescind their membership in any O'Brien-supported pages. Similar action came when NBC removed reruns of O'Brien's The Tonight Show from NBC.com and Hulu. Gaspin was happy with the settlement, but nevertheless agreed with one of O'Brien's points, that his show had no time to grow. Could it have grown? Absolutely. We just couldn't give him the time. Zucker, in an interview with Charlie Rose, defended his strategy, but noted that both moving Leno to primetime and giving O'Brien The Tonight Show was a mistake. In addition, he stated that he received death threats due to his role in the conflict. Zucker, who had known O'Brien since their days at Harvard University and was very close friends with Ross, was very disappointed with how events played out, although he viewed it as necessary. Leno, in an attempt to repair his public perception, granted an interview to Oprah Winfrey on January 25th. He stripped himself of any blame for O'Brien's departure, noting that it was all about ratings, and also confirmed that he told a white lie in 2004 when he guaranteed The Tonight Show to O'Brien. In a reference to a 2007 Super Bowl commercial starring Letterman and Winfrey, the two had feuded for years prior, Letterman, Leno, and Winfrey all appeared in a Super Bowl ad during the Super Bowl in February 2010. The ad, Letterman's idea, was the first time the late-night hosts had met since their original 1992 debacle. In it, Leno and Letterman sit on opposing sides of Winfrey watching the game. Letterman deems it the worst Super Bowl party ever due to Leno's inclusion, and Winfrey tells him to be nice, resulting in Leno quipping, "Oh, he's just saying that because I'm here." The clip stirred a frenzy, with commentators speculating that Leno had been green-screened into the picture. Letterman had initially wanted O'Brien to be in the promo as well, but O'Brien firmly rejected, saying, "No fucking way I'm doing that. It's not a joke to me. It's real." O'Brien was sure his agreement prohibited television appearances for several months, but gathered NBC would be only too happy to allow him a one-time reprieve for the ad, as it was to improve Leno's image. O'Brien, by this point, was planning a live tour with his staff that would take him on the road, and also had created a Twitter account. After about 1 hour online, O'Brien's numbers on Twitter followers had rocketed past the 30,000 followers of the official Jay Leno account, and he held over 300,000 followers in under 24 hours. He surpassed the 1 million mark in May of 2010. Many speculated that O'Brien would sign a deal with Fox for a late-night program. Comedy Central and HBO also had expressed interest in O'Brien. Fox's deal moved slowly and then eventually withdrew their offer due to station resistance, the daunting financial investment, and opposition from Roger Ailes. O'Brien eventually signed with TBS in April, with his next program, Conan, set to debut in November. The move prompted industry surprises. Online blog Vulture commented that Conan will now be featured as a lead-in for Lopez Tonight on TBS. It's not just basic cable, it's unsexy basic cable. His nationwide comedy tour, the Legally Prohibited from Being Funny on Television tour, began on April 12th and ran through June 14th. A documentary shot during that time, Conan O'Brien Can't Stop, as well as a May 60 Minutes interview, prompted some observers to deem him whiny. Vanity Fair's James Wolcott said O'Brien came off as a peevish straw of nervous energy, a self-involved chatterbox. As NBC could have possibly retained intellectual property originating from O'Brien's entire 17-year tenure with the network, O'Brien simply changed names on the tour, turning his character, the masturbating bear, into the self-pleasing panda. The Washington Post later reported that retaining the characters was not a key issue for O'Brien.
Coming to you from Warner Brothers Studios, it's Conan!
Conan premiered in November of 2010 to 4 million viewers, leading all late-night talk shows and more than tripling the audience of its direct competition, The Daily Show and The Colbert Report on Comedy Central. However, ratings quickly fell. By the following fall, the show was averaging 1 million viewers in the 18 to 49 demographic. In an effort to bolster ratings, TBS secured the cable syndication rights to The Big Bang Theory at a report of $2 million per episode to serve as lead-ins to Conan 3 nights a week. Steve Koonin of Turner Entertainment stated in 2012 that Conan is the centerpiece of TBS. The Hollywood Reporter credited for forging a digital empire. His company's own shows and a young audience TBS hopes will follow him anywhere. TBS announced in May of 2017 that they had renewed the show through 2022. However, despite the show's renewal, it was announced in November 2020 that the show would end in June 2021, with O'Brien producing a weekly variety show for HBO Max. His final show on Late Night aired on June 24, 2021, with a montage of clips from his shows along with an extended farewell monologue. Many of the executives involved in the botched transition subsequently left NBC. Zucker was fired by Comcast Executive Vice President Steve Burke, but he stressed that Comcast's insistence to install their own team was the reason. West Coast Business Operations Executive Mark Graboff opted to leave his contract early, as did Programming Executive Jeff Gaspin. While O'Brien admitted in 2012 that he occasionally still felt resentment over the events that transpired, he noted that I had an amazing partnership with NBC and was very disappointed at the outcome. He has had no contact with Leno, noting the odds are we will both leave this earth without speaking to each other, which is fine. There's really nothing to say. We both know the deal. He knows. I know. I'd rather just forget. In a 2010 issue of TV Guide, the time slot conflict ranked number 1 on a list of TV's biggest blunders. A wax likeness of O'Brien that had been commissioned by NBCUniversal from Madame Tussauds was unveiled during a December 2009 episode of The Tonight Show and was quietly returned to the Madame Tussauds Museum on Hollywood Boulevard. The figure had originally been intended to permanently reside in the NBCUniversal Experience theme park attraction. A remote segment produced a few months into O'Brien's TBS show saw the host humorously reuniting with the wax statue. On October 5, 2011, O'Brien returned to 30 Rockefeller Plaza for a surprise scripted appearance on Late Night with Jimmy Fallon to ceremonially retrieve the Try the Insult comic dog puppet from the studio after NBC had finally granted him the rights to use the character on TBS's Conan. During the 2.5-minute bit, O'Brien and Fallon joked about the controversy when Fallon said, "You were host of Late Night for 16 years, then what happened?" To which O'Brien laughed and said, "Don't you worry about that. You're a young guy." During his 2012 appearance on The Late Show with David Letterman, O'Brien made it clear that he had no animosity towards NBC, pointing out that the individual executives he clashed with had departed the network shortly after he did due to a regiment change. Indeed, O'Brien would occasionally show clips from his NBC show on his TBS program with NBC's permission, and the network also allowed the character of Triumph, the insult comic dog, to appear on TBS's show as well, with Triumph's performer Robert Smigel explaining that NBC only stands to gain by allowing him to give the property exposure. In an interview with CNN's Piers Morgan Live in 2012, O'Brien acknowledged that in retrospect, the plan to engineer a transition for The Tonight Show 5 years in advance was absurd, though we know that he never anticipated Leno's ratings would fall into that interim, as the press had sometimes intimidated. And he pointed out that all previous Tonight Show hosts had departed when they were at the top of their ratings. He further remarked that he was happier in his current situation at TBS, where he feels liberated and can do the material he wants without the baggage of upholding a legacy. In 2013, O'Brien was the headline performer invited to give remarks at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, and the Tonight Show controversy was humorously alluded to throughout the evening. During his own speech, President Barack Obama quipped, "I understand that when the correspondents' associations were considering Conan for the gig, they were faced with the age-old dilemma. Do you offer it to him now or wait for 5 years and then give it to Jimmy Fallon?" O'Brien himself referenced the affair with a joke that complimented President Obama on job creation. Since Obama was first elected, the number of posts has doubled and the number of Tonight Show hosts has tripled. Later that year, O'Brien was chosen to host Carson on TCM, a series that aired classic interviews from The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson on Turner Classic Movies. In 2014, Leno was interviewed for 60 Minutes, where it focused on the host's second and permanent departure from The Tonight Show desk. Leno expressed to Steve Kroft that he had been blindsided in 2004 when NBC executives asked him to relinquish The Tonight Show in 5 years' time, though he admitted that he accepted the decision with no arguments or inquiry. In spite of this and the public remarks Leno had made at the time blessing O'Brien's succession, both Leno and his wife Mavis characterized The Tonight Show as having been taken from the incumbent host, rather than being something that was voluntarily surrendered. When Leno explained that he was more than willing to step aside the second time during the considerable talent of Fallon, and because talented people will only wait so long before they get other opportunities, Kropp pointed out that Leno himself said very similar things about O'Brien years before. Well, maybe I did, yeah. Well, we'll see what happens, O'Brien, as Leno briefly joked. During a 2015 interview with Howard Stern, O'Brien explained that he prefers to avoid talking about the craziness, stating that people in show business shouldn't complain. He also claimed that even in hindsight, he does not regret doing 5 more years of late night instead of moving to Fox, nor does he regret his incarnation of The Tonight Show. Leno hosted his second reincarnation of The Tonight Show until February 2014, when Jimmy Fallon took over the hosting duties. Fallon's credibility with younger viewers and presence online was why NBC instituted the change, which was announced only 3 years following O'Brien's departure. During the show that aired on the day of the announcement, O'Brien congratulated Fallon, stating, "Jimmy is the perfect guy to do it, and he's going to do a fantastic job." Though NBC made a considerable effort to scrub any references of O'Brien's brief tenure as The Tonight Show host both on-air and online, with one former blogger for NBC Sports noting a corporate policy banning of any mentioning of O'Brien, it was acknowledged by the network during the build-up to the 2014 transition from Leno to Fallon. A brief shot of O'Brien walking onto his Tonight Show set was displayed in an on-air promo chronicling the franchise's history, and Fallon referenced the conflict on his first Tonight Show episode, which he opened the show by saying, "I'm Jimmy Fallon, and I'll be your host for now. Of course, I wouldn't be here tonight if it weren't for the previous Tonight Show host, so I want to say thank you to Steve Allen, Jack Parr, Johnny Carson, Jay Leno, Conan O'Brien, and Jay Leno." Leno appeared on the Arsenio Hall Show on February 26, 2014 as a surprise guest to deliver the news that the revived program had been renewed by CBS TV for a second season. This proved to be premature, however, as Hall's program was indeed canceled on May 30th. Comedian Bill Maher paid tribute to Leno when the latter was inducted to the Television Hall of Fame, an honor bestowed upon the host in 2014 when he stepped down from The Tonight Show for a second time. A longtime friend of Leno, Maher complained that Leno was victimized by the press during the NBC fiasco. In a 2015 interview, Leno reiterated his stance that O'Brien's own performance led to his ouster from 11:35, and that he remained mystified by the suggestion that he should have refused the time slot when it was offered back to him, saying, "Why? Because Conan and I were good friends? No. At that point, it's a business decision. I'm sure it could have been handled differently, but I think it was a matter of letting things take its course. If Conan's ratings would have been fine, it wouldn't have been an issue. It wouldn't have come up." In 2017, Leno again absolved himself, instead emphasizing that he kept The Tonight Show #1 after his return. He also addressed with equivocation the long-standing claim that his contract was the more expensive one to break. I mean, if I'm that smart, how did I lose that show in the first place? When he took over tonight, Fallon insisted that Leno is welcome to appear on the show anytime he wishes, saying, "Whatever he wants, he's got a stage." Leno made his first appearance as a guest on November 17, 2004, and has appeared several more times since. Additionally, Leno stepped onto Late Night with Seth Meyers and The Late Late Show with Craig Ferguson. On February 13, 2015, Robert Smigel appeared in character as Triumph the Insult Comic Dog on the Jimmy Fallon Tonight Show to promote the Jack and Triumph show. During the interview, he joked about the conflict to a visibly nervous Fallon. "Listen, we love NBC. NBC, we kid, you know. NBC will always be the place where Jack and I got our start, and where they fucked Conan." As the controversy grew distant with time, formal acknowledgement of O'Brien's lengthy career at NBC became more common with the network. In 2017, mentions were made of the host in NBC's 90th anniversary special, and a display for him among all Tonight Show hosts appears in the ride of Race Through New York starring Jimmy Fallon at the Universal Studios, Florida. In conjunction with the 25th anniversary as a late-night host, it was announced that O'Brien, TBS, and NBC had come to an arrangement that would allow the entirety of O'Brien's late-night archives, totaling over 4,000 episodes, to be available in January 2019 via a state-of-the-art website dubbed Conan25. On January 21st, 2010, NBC announced Leno will return to The Tonight Show. Jay Leno began his second tenure on March 1st of that year. The show moved to Stage 11 in Burbank, the former home of The Jay Leno Show, with a similar set and theme song to The Jay Leno Show. Tonight Show bandleader Kevin Eubanks announced on April 12th he'd be leaving The Tonight Show after 18 years with Leno. Eubanks' replacement was former American Idol musical director Ricky Minor. Minor composed a new theme when the show was taken over. On July 1st, Variety reported that only 6 months into its second life, Leno's Tonight Show posted its lowest ratings since 1992. By September, Leno's ratings in the adults 18 to 49 demographics had fallen below those of O'Brien, who had hosted The Tonight Show a year prior. In October 2010, David Letterman's program beat Leno's program for the first time since Leno returned to hosting The Tonight Show. By May, Leno regained the lead and held it since then. However, by August of 2012, the Los Angeles Times was reporting that The Tonight Show was in serious trouble for a number of reasons, most notably that NBC was losing money. While Leno offered to take a pay cut, at least 24 members of the staff were laid off. By March of 2013, there was rumors that NBC would have Jay Leno, who had been hosting late night since 2009, succeeded O'Brien, become the next host of The Tonight Show when Leno's current contract ended in 2014, and NBC would move the show back to New York for the first time in over 40 years. On May 13, 2013, during its fall upfront presentation, NBC confirmed Fallon would take over The Tonight Show beginning on February 17th of 2014. Seth Meyers, in turn, would leave Saturday Night Live and take over Fallon's time slot. Leno's final show on The Tonight Show was February 6, 2014. Per the deal of his terms with NBC, his staff was paid through September of 2014. Leno wrapped up the night before the 2014 Sochi Winter Olympics, which began on February 7th. Fallon took over The Tonight Show on February 17th. Leno himself would later appear multiple times on Jimmy Fallon's Tonight Show. During the last year with Leno as host, The Tonight Show cost about $1.7 million a week to produce. With 45 weeks of annual production, that amounted to about $76.5 million, excluding the salary for Leno and the show's top producers. On February 6, 2014, Leno hosted his final show, which featured several pre-taped well wishes for a variety of celebrities, including Steve Carell, President Barack Obama, and offered Leno an ambassadorship to Antarctica. Hopefully you have a warm coat, funny man. Appearing as Leno's final guests were Billy Crystal, who was Leno's first guest in 1992, and Garth Brooks. Crystal surprised Leno by leading an onstage sing-along of So Long Farewell from The Sound of Music, with lyrics from the occasional performed by special guests Jack Black, Kim Kardashian, Chris Paul, Sheryl Crow, Jim Parsons, Carol Burnett, and Oprah Winfrey. Brooks performed his touching song The Dance at Leno's request before closing out the show with the rousing Friends in Low Places. In closing the greatest 22 years of my life, Leno turned emotional in his final remarks, calling himself the luckiest guy in the world. I got to meet presidents, astronauts, and movie stars. Leno also thanked the audience as well as his staff, who became his family after the death of his parents and his brother early in his Tonight tenure. Needless to say, Jay Leno's second goodbye wasn't as celebrated as his first time saying farewell. The battle he had created forcing Conan out hurt him big time with people and put a lot of pressure and worry on the man who'd be the next in line to host The Tonight Show, who had only been in the late-night game for only 5 years up to that point, and even then, was his future as secure as Conan's was? Well, considering that as of today he's still the host, I think it's safe to say that Jimmy Fallon didn't get quite the shoddy treatment from NBC that Conan did.
Welcome to The Tonight Show. I'm Jimmy Fallon, and I'll be your host for now.
James Thomas Fallon was born in the Bay Ridge neighborhood of New York City's Brooklyn borough on September 19, 1974, the son of Gloria and James Fallon. His paternal grandmother was a German immigrant from Osternholz-Schwarmbeck, while his maternal grandmother's father was a Norwegian immigrant from Frederiksted. Another set of his great-great-grandparents were an Irish couple from County Galway, with his great-great-grandmother herself being born to an Irish couple in France. Fallon's father spent his adolescence singing in street-corner doo-wop groups, then served in the Vietnam War. Shortly after his son's birth, he started working as a machine repairman for IBM in Kingston, New York. In preparation, the family moved nearby to Saugerties, New York. Fallon had described his childhood as idyllic, while his parents had been described as overprotective. He and his sister Gloria were unable to leave their home and had to ride their bicycles in the backyard. Fallon attended the Roman Catholic school St. Mary of the Snow. He considered becoming a priest inspired by his experiences as an altar boy, but became more interested in comedy instead. He spent many nights listening to the radio program The Dr. Demento Show, which exposed him to both comedy and music. He often recorded it on a reel-to-reel recorder. As a teenager, Fallon developed an obsession with the late-night comedy program Saturday Night Live. He watched it religiously, although he was only allowed to see the clean parts that his parents taped for him. He and Gloria would reenact sketches such as the Festrug Brothers with friends. In his teens, he impressed his parents with impersonations, including of actor James Cagney and comedian Dana Carvey. He was musically inclined and started playing guitar at age 13, going out to perform comedy and music at concerts and shows. By his junior high years, he was labeled as a class clown, but was also described as nice and well-mannered. At Socrates High School, Fallon was a performer in most stage productions and was twice a class social director. He won a Young Comedians contest with an impression of Pee Wee Herman, and he graduated in 1992 and then attended the College of St. Rose in Albany, New York, where he became a computer science major before switching to communications in his senior year. He was an average student who would perform stand-up comedy on weekends. He would often board buses from his aunt's house in Fort Hamilton to perform sets at Caroline's on Broadway and Times Square. He did not graduate, leaving college a semester early to pursue a comedy career. 14 years later, in May 2009, Fallon returned to receive a Bachelor's of Arts in Communications awarded by St. Rose officials who granted him experiential learning credits for his television work. He joined his classmates at the Saratoga Performing Arts Center to collect his degree, where along with his BA, he was also awarded an honorary Doctor of Humane Letters. Fallon dropped out of the College of St. Rose in 1995 to move to Los Angeles and pursue comedy full-time. He secured a manager and got bookings by the age of 21. He often did stand-up at the Improv, earning $7.50 per set, and he joined classes with the Groundlings, an improv comedy troupe. His one line in the 1997 film Father's Day was cut, but he can still be seen in the background. And in 1998, he appeared briefly on the show Spin City in the second season as a man selling photographs. But he remained fixated on joining Saturday Night Live. After 2 years of working with the Groundlings, he auditioned for the program in 1997 but was unsuccessful. When he was cast in a pilot presentation for the WB, Fallon made sure to include a clause in his contract specifying that if he were to join SNL, he would be released from his contract. His manager sent videotapes to Marcy Klein and Aya Colin, producers for Saturday Night Live. As Fallon put it, "This was my ultimate goal. If I ever cut into a birthday cake and made a wish, I would wish to be on Saturday Night Live. If I threw a coin into a fountain, I would wish to be on Saturday Night Live. If I saw a shooting star, I would wish to be on Saturday Night Live. I remember saying to myself, if I don't make it on the show before I'm 25, I'm going to kill myself. It's crazy. I had no other plan. I didn't have friends. I didn't have a girlfriend. I didn't have anything going on. I had my career, and that was it." Fallon landed his second audition at the age of 23. At the notoriously difficult audition, he was told by several people that creator Lorne Michaels almost never laughed during auditions. He feared being outshined by the comic before him, who came armed with an arsenal of props. Despite this, Fallon went on stage and did well, performing a celebrity walkathon with impressions of Jerry Seinfeld, Chris Rock, Bill Cosby, and Adam Sandler, and SNL alums who had recently left the show. Michaels and others laughed. Head writer Tina Fey, who was in the room, later said, "He's one of two people I've ever seen who was completely ready to be on the show. Kristen Wiig is the other one, and Jimmy was ready, like if there had been a show to do that night." He'd rushed through his original characters in order to arrive at his musical impressions where he felt he was stronger. 3 weeks passed, and despite his feeling that he had not gotten the position, he was asked to meet with Michaels at the Paramount lot in Los Angeles. Michaels informed him that they wanted him for the show, and Fallon characterized the moment as being in slow motion, remarking to Michaels before he left, "I'm going to make you proud." Fallon debuted on Saturday Night Live as a featured player at the beginning of the show's 24th season in September of 1998. He became a star by his fourth episode, where he performed Halloween-themed versions of songs by popular artists, as well as a Sandler impression. Fallon became a celebrity considered charming by his largely female fan base, receiving numerous letters from fans, and he became the subject of numerous fan sites. He became the program's most featured mimic, doing popular impressions of Robert De Niro, Jerry Seinfeld, and Howard Stern. He also starred as many original characters, including Nick Burns, an IT support nerd, Pat Sully Sullivan, one of the Boston teens with Rachel Dratch, and in Jarrett's Room, a fictional webcast hosted by Stoner College students Jarrett, Fallon, and Gobi, played by Horatio Sands. He was promoted to repertory player in his second season. And in his off time, Fallon released a book comprising email exchanges with his sister Gloria titled "I Hate This Place, A Pessimistic Guide to Life," and played a minor role in the 2000 film Almost Famous. During their time at Saturday Night Live, Fallon and Horatio Sands often drank together. Sands had described himself and Fallon as super functional alcoholics and said, "They say that kind of goes hand in hand with Saturday Night Live. Some kind of substance abuse issues because it's so stressful you easily find yourself blowing off steam a lot." On one occasion, they spent a Friday night watching The Strokes performing a midnight show, staying up drinking until the early morning despite having to do Saturday Night Live that night. "We actually took what we thought being on SNL was, what people think is awesome about it, and we made it happen," said Sands, who said that he and Fallon got into more than a few bar fights. Fallon initially planned to spend 3 years at Saturday Night Live like John Belushi, but he was persuaded to stay on for 3 more when giving the reins to Weekend Update. His co-hosting with Tina Fey further increased his profile. During this tenure, he formed a close relationship with Michaels, whom he'd consult on dating, career advice, and more. Fallon called a December 2001 sketch in which he imitates Rolling Stone frontman Mick Jagger in a mirror opposite Jagger, his favorite thing he had done up to that point. In his later years, Fallon co-starred in the skit The Barry Gibb Talk Show, in which he and musician Justin Timberlake portrayed Bee Gees brothers Barry and Robin Gibb. It marked the beginning of a long-running friendship and collaboration with Timberlake. Fallon became known for his tendency to break character in sketches, an attribute he, as well as Michaels, disliked. It began in the famous More Cowbell sketch when Will Ferrell wore a tighter shirt than expected, causing Fallon to crack up. After this, other cast members would try to get Fallon to break. Some cast members believed he was attempting to steal the moment to make the sketch about himself. The joke became near constant during Fallon's final year of the show. During his time at the show, Fallon played his SNL success into co-hosting the 2001 MTV Movie Awards and the MTV Video Music Awards of 2002, and recorded his debut comedy album, The Bathroom Wall, which was nominated for a Grammy for Best Comedy Album. He also modeled for Calvin Klein. Fallon was named one of People magazine's 50 Most Beautiful People in 2002, an honor Fallon found embarrassing. Fallon began to pursue a film career in 2004. He had spurned most major roles due to the lack of time and disinterest in the dozens of scripts he read. He signed on for his first lead role in Taxi, a remake of the French film, after co-star Queen Latifah became attached to the project. He was also attracted to the film's action-comedy tone, seeing comparisons with SNL alums Eddie Murphy's first big film, 48 Hours, in 1982. In the fall of 2003, he split his time between shooting the film in Los Angeles and returning to New York City for SNL. With his contract ending, his 6th season at SNL would be his last. Fallon signed off at the conclusion of the show's 29th season in May 2004. With big expectations from the studio, Taxi premiered in the fall of 2004, a flop with critics and audiences. It was Fallon's first failure. 20th Century Fox had already signed him for his second major role, starring opposite Drew Barrymore in the 2005 romantic comedy Fever Pitch. Fever Pitch fared little better than Taxi, receiving mild reviews and tepid box office returns. He met his wife, producer Nancy Javoven, during production of the film, and the two wedded December 2007. Fallon began receiving fewer film offers. He had entered what he would call a lost period, drinking more alcohol and beset by confusion over his next career moves. Fallon moved back east to New York, spending a couple of years aimlessly knocking around. He wrote a script during that time about a guy in a goth band that pretended to be a country music star. Before leaving Saturday Night Live, Michaels had told Fallon that he would be a good fit to take over NBC's late-night franchise when then-host Conan O'Brien would leave for The Tonight Show. Michaels urged NBC to give Fallon a holding deal in February 2007 so that he could not be lured anywhere. According to Michaels himself, Jimmy's built for this kind of a show. He's funny, he's charming, he's got a really good way of connecting with people, and he knows music, movies, and TV very well, which is the backbone of these shows. Fallon wasn't approached by NBC until early 2008. His movie career self-admittedly hadn't worked out that great, and NBC contracted him to become O'Brien's replacement. The network had a couple of other candidates in mind to replace Conan, but Michaels insisted he'd only produce the show with Fallon as host. In May of 2008, NBC announced that Fallon would be O'Brien's replacement, an announcement that was met with some bewilderment and even snickers, according to New York Magazine. At the time of the announcement, he was scheduled to debut in June 2009. Michaels soon tasked Fallon with training for the gig by returning to her stand-up roots. For 8 months, Fallon toured college campuses and comedy clubs where he tested a new 50-minute routine. In addition, Michaels and Fallon assembled a well-pedigreed team from late night, including longtime SNL producer Steve Higgins and Michael Shoemaker as announcer and showrunner, respectively, and celebrated hip-hop group The Roots as the house band. Before the show debuted, Conan O'Brien sent a large plastic pickle to Fallon's office, accompanied by a handwritten note reflecting the ritual. The Letterman people sent this pickle to my office in 1993. Now I'm passing it on to you. Whenever you leave, which won't be for a long time, make sure you pass it on to the next sap. Fallon, in turn, presented the pickle on air to incoming late-night host Seth Meyers on January 28, 2014. In an early sketch about recording promos for the show's debut, Fallon announcer Steve Higgins joked, "You loved him on SNL, you hated him in the movies, now you're ambivalent." Late Night with Jimmy Fallon premiered on March 2, 2009, with Robert De Niro, Justin Timberlake, Nick Carter, and Van Morrison appearing as Fallon's first guest. Former Late Night host Conan O'Brien also made a cameo appearance in the beginning. The Hollywood Reporter described the episode like this. Fallon opened with a fairly traditional monologue that drew few laughs, followed by a couple of prepared bits that were long on ambition but failed to connect. Bits introduced during the show's debut night were Slow Jam the News and Lick It for 10. The Los Angeles Times, in retrospect, referred to it as an uneven beginning, recalling, Fallon booked one of the world's worst interview subjects, Robert De Niro, as his first guest, and the acknowledged irony, De Niro was asked questions he could answer in a single word, did not make the interview any better or funny. Timberlake was Fallon's second guest offering, a Bulin in doing dead-on impressions of John Mayer and Michael McDonald, before matching on camera against longtime rival Nick Carter in an arm wrestling match that Carter ultimately won. Van Morrison was the show's first musical guest. Fallon acknowledged possibly roughness, saying that the intimacy of late-night shows demands early modulating. We're going to find our style. I know I'm going to get reviewed off the first show, as opposed to the first couple of months. Discussions for Fallon to take over The Tonight Show began in early 2013, with the transition intended to be happening by late 2014 at the latest. Many industry observers noted that the change appeared to come as a result of another late-night competitor, Jimmy Kimmel, 24 years old at the time of Carson's retirement of Jimmy Kimmel Live on ABC, who had moved to the 11:35 slot months prior. NBC feared that waiting too long to promote Fallon, Kimmel could create a stranglehold on young demographics, which is the key to financial successes of the franchise. Fallon had reportedly impressed top executives at Comcast, and his succession was widely expected throughout the company. The transition reportedly lacked the tension of the previous Tonight transitions, and the program's relocation east signaled NBC's strong commitment to not making any changes that would have messed up the program any further. Finally, on April 3, 2013, NBC announced that Jay Leno would retire in 2014, and Fallon would take over The Tonight Show beginning on February 24, 2014. At Leno's suggestion, the date was moved forward with the end of his contract in September 2014 to February so as to use NBC's coverage of the 2014 Winter Olympics as a springboard for Fallon's tenure. The date was later moved up a week to February 17th, midway through the Olympics. As Leno's contract ran until September 2014, much of the staff were paid until that month. By bringing on many of his recurring bits and features from late night, Fallon had departed in a few ways from the format which Leno used for his show. Fallon's edition placed less emphasis on this opening monologue, a feature which was a staple of the Leno edition, and in his opening episode, he would describe what the format of the show would be. He would only briefly mention the monologue. The show has many recurring segments and games that are played with the various celebrity guests. The most popular of these, Lip Sync Battle, which was spun off into its own show that premiered on Paramount Network after being passed by NBC, who did not realize its potential as showcased by Emma Stone's rendition of DJ Khaled's All I Do Is Win. Similarly, Wheel of Musical Impressions, another popular segment, spawned That's My Jam, a music and variety game show that debuted in November 2021 on NBC with Fallon as host. Other segments included playing charades, catchphrase, Pictionary, or other family-style games. Additionally, Fallon and celebrity guests regularly appeared in sketches parodying pop culture or political events. These segments normally take place after the monologue, but had occurred at a cold open on the show for a few occasions. Just as he portrayed Mitt Romney during the 2012 election season, Fallon portrayed Republican candidate Donald Trump and Democratic candidate Bernie Sanders. Alongside Fallon's impressions, other celebrities occasionally appeared. Several have recurring roles, including Dion Flynn as Barack Obama, David Alan Grier as Ben Carson, Aziz Ansari as Bobby Jindal, and the show's announcer Steve Higgins as Jeb Bush, as well as the show's head writer A.D. Miles appearing as Lindsey Graham. After his critically acclaimed appearance as Trump on Tonight, Fallon was asked to play the role on December 19, 2015's episode of Saturday Night Live, since Taran Killam would be busy playing Ted Cruz. Fallon accepted the offer, but the plan fell through at some point before the show. The role was then replaced by Daryl Hammond, who played Trump over his 14 years on Saturday Night Live. Fallon had also appeared on figures such as Vladimir Putin and Bob Dylan. The Tonight Show starring Jimmy Fallon originated from NBC's Studio 6B at 30 Rockefeller Center in New York City, the original home of Johnny Carson's Tonight Show, where it was taped every weekday at 5 p.m. The studio house between Carson and his predecessor Jack Parr before the franchise moved to Burbank in 1972. It is where The Tonight Show started, and actually in the studio where we are going to be, that's where Johnny Carson was. There's Broadway, there's Times Square. There's something glamorous about it. That is The Tonight Show, Fallon remarked. NBC spent approximately $5 million renovating Studio 6B, where Fallon had been taping late night, for The Tonight Show's return to New York City. The upgraded 6B contains improved acoustics and a seating capacity of 240, up from 189, but still smaller than the seating capacity of the Late Late Show. The investment also included a new control room and a new lobby to welcome guests. The larger audience also meant NBC could take advantage of a newly enacted New York State tax credit for talk shows that are filmed before a studio audience of at least 200, as long as they are carrying a production budget of at least $30 million and have been shooting around New York City for at least 5 seasons. The show's set was designed by theatrical set designer Eugene Lee, known for his credits on Saturday Night Live, whom Fallon thanked on his first episode. The set emphasizes stained wood and a mid-century modern style, including a stale blue couch, a handsome honey-colored wood deck, and matching walls. Behind the desk near the city backdrop is a wood-carved miniature replica of New York City skyscrapers. I think it's Eugene Lee's masterpiece, says producer Michaels. Fallon's monologue spot is noted by a painted four-leaf clover on the floor. Fallon's new set is purposely old-fashioned compared to the College Cafe in the meatpacking district where he lived on late nights, said Entertainment Weekly. USA Today called the set more intimate and theatrical than the set employed on The Tonight Show with Jay Leno, and the New York Times called it more elegant, but also quite formal and a little impersonal. The show's logo, its title set against the full moon, is a callback to the Honeymooners. While the title is a throwback to Carson's tenure, Leno and O'Brien both favored a with rather than starring in their respective titles. In November 2014, a new marquee was added to the Avenue of the Americas entrance of 30 Rock, which promotes the building as the home of The Tonight Show starring Jimmy Fallon. The new marquee was also designed so that it can be usable as a stage for performances. John Wallace, NBCUniversal's president of technical operations, described the marquee as being a bold statement that The Tonight Show has been brought back to New York. Fallon joked that he was jealous of Letterman, and that the marquee makes it exponentially harder for them to fire me. In the show's debut episode, Fallon introduced his supporting stars and gave a brief history of his life and career, following up with a sketch, The Evolution of Hip-Hop Dancing, with actor Will Smith, and a musical performance by U2 at the top of the Rock. Following the show's premiere, many notable episodes of the show have produced segments that went viral on sites like Facebook and YouTube. Among the show's most popular bits are lip-sync battles, one featuring actress Emma Stone, airing in April 2014, which became a popular viral video. In October 2014, Harry Potter actor Daniel Radcliffe recited rapper Blacklicious' Alphabetic Aerobics, which became the most viewed online video of the show. Other clips, including the Wheel of Musical Impressions with singers Ariana Grande and Christina Aguilera, have been widely viewed, as has a clip of Fallon and comedian Kevin Hart riding the Hollywood Rip Ride Rocket Ride roller coaster during the show's first remote broadcast at Universal Studios Florida. Sketches that have reunited cast of television shows such as Saved by the Bell, in addition to an a cappella version of popular songs performed by Fallon and The Roots, have also been popular. The show's most widely circulated interview segment was once aired in January 2015, with actress Nicole Kidman, who jokingly revealed that she once had a crush on Fallon, to which, at the time, he was oblivious. On February 1st, 2015, the show aired its first live show from the Orpheum Theater in Phoenix, Arizona, as a lead-up program for NBC's broadcast of Super Bowl 49. The show included an appearance by Arnold Schwarzenegger, a lip-sync battle with Kevin Hart and Will Ferrell, appearances by Super Bowl champion New England Patriots players, and a performance by Ariana Grande. In September 2016, Fallon faced criticism after an interview with Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump. Critics accused Fallon of humanizing Trump, who had made controversial statements during the presidential campaign. Democratic candidate Hillary Clinton had also appeared on the show prior that year. Fallon responded to the controversy, claiming that nobody should have expected him to ask any difficult questions, since he is never hard on anyone. Fallon acknowledged that the interview was a setback 3 months after Trump was inaugurated. On February 4th, 2018, the show aired its second live show from the Orpheum Theater in Minneapolis, Minnesota, as a lead-up program to Super Bowl 52. The show included guest Justin Timberlake, who was the featured performer at that year's halftime show, the cast of This Is Us, and Dwayne Johnson, with a performance by Timberlake featuring Chris Stapleton. On February 20th, 2019, during that night's The Tonight Show episode, The Tonight Show YouTube channel reached 20 million subscribers, making it the first late-night talk show to achieve such a milestone. On March 26, 2021, TikTok celebrity Addison Rae appeared on the show. During a segment, she taught Fallon how to do some popular TikTok dances. The segment featured much backlash due to its failure to credit all the many black creators on the dances, despite NBC later crediting on the creators in the description of the video on YouTube. In lieu of an apology, on April 6, Fallon interviewed virtually all of the creators of the dances. On April 1st, 2022, both Fallon and Jimmy Kimmel swapped places as part of an April Fool's Day prank, with the former hosting Jimmy Kimmel Live in Los Angeles and the later hosting in Studio 6B for The Tonight Show. On August 13th of that year, the show's YouTube channel reached 30 million subscribers and became the first and only show as of 2023 to achieve that landmark. The debut episode of The Tonight Show starring Jimmy Fallon averaged a 3.8 rating in adults 18 to 49, the most coveted demographic, and 11.3 million viewers overall, according to Nielsen. The program's first week averaged 8.49 million viewers, making it the franchise's most watched week in 20 years. Following its premiere, Fallon consistently won its time slot in ratings, routinely beating Late Show with David Letterman and Jimmy Kimmel Live. Despite this, the ratings for competitors never significantly fell, with Fallon winning due to a surge in younger viewers. In his first year as host, Fallon's Tonight Show improved on ratings delivered by his predecessor, Jay Leno. The show's post-Super Bowl episode in 2015 averaged 9.8 million viewers, and the following week's show from Los Angeles maintained their highest rating since their premiere. A 2016 New York Times study of the 50 TV shows with the most popular Facebook likes found that Tonight is most popular in cities in the countryside. The show's ratings began to fall after the debut of The Late Show with Stephen Colbert in 2015. While it quickly rebounded and remained top-rated late-night programming beginning in 2017, The Tonight Show lost total viewership to Colbert. Fallon's ratings continued to fall in the intervening years. Colbert secured key demographic wins in 2019 and has since won every consecutive television season overall as of 2023, marking the show's longest winning streak over The Tonight Show. For the 2020-21 season, Fallon fell to third in overall ratings for the first time, behind Colbert and Kimmel. Fallon's ratings fall had been ascribed to his pursuit of broader appeal rather than political criticism on divisive issues, especially in an era of increased national polarization. His cheerful 2016 interview of Donald Trump was widely considered an unpopular move that contributed to his ratings decline. Some have argued that the decline of the Tonight Talk Show as a form, as well as cratering ratings across linear television, renders the problem moot. Like pretty much everything on TV, late-night ratings are down across the board, observed a columnist for The Wrap in 2021. As of late 2023, Fallon averages behind both Colbert and Kimmel in total ratings. According to a report from Radar Online from January 2023, the show is averaging 1.3 million viewers, which is less than half the viewers of Gutfeld on Fox News. Fallon holds a higher number of YouTube subscribers and reportedly leads on social media. But this does not drive advertising rates for the show. Much like Fallon's preceding tenure on Late Night, many clips of the show have been made available on YouTube, Facebook, and other services shortly after its television broadcast. Many clips have gone on to become viral videos, which, along with widely viewed videos from competitor Jimmy Kimmel Live, affects the entire state of late-night television. Media pundits have predicted the future's program's accessibility online will be more critical than their television ratings. David Letterman, a 30-year veteran of the format, was the first host of Late Night and then host of Late Show on CBS until 2025, partially retired due to his ability to produce viral bits. In February 2015, Ben & Jerry's released a new flavor of ice cream called the Tonight Dough. It consists of caramel and chocolate ice creams topped with chocolate cookie swirls, chocolate chip cookie dough, and peanut butter cookie dough. On October 27, 2015, it was announced that the attraction Twister Ride It Out at Universal Studios would be closing on November 2nd of that year, to be replaced by Race Through New York starring Jimmy Fallon, a ride based on Fallon's Tonight Show, which opened on April 6, 2017. On September 7, 2023, Rolling Stone published an expose on Fallon's tenure, with testimony by 16 former and current staff members alleging Fallon's behavior behind the scenes, which included being drunk on stage, abrasive yelling at riders, bullying of staff, among other things. Writers used dressing rooms as crying rooms to release tension, and one staffer admitted to having suicidal thoughts during his time on staff because of Fallon's behavior. The report also noted that there were 9 showrunners in the history of the broadcast up to that point. Fallon had made an apology to his staff the afternoon of the September 7th Rolling Stone report. On October 3rd, 2023, Rolling Stone noted that Fallon did not address the controversy whatsoever during the first taping of the show after the 2023 WGA strike, with the Rolling Stone expose seemingly and oddly being forgotten about shortly after. Many moments from the show have garnered viral videos. The show has been nominated for 9 Primetime Emmy Awards, winning 2. On May 17, 2021, NBC renewed the show for 5 more years through 2026. On June 13, 2024, NBC extended Fallon's contract to host until 2028. Throughout this documentary, I've been giving you a detailed look at the 7-decade history of The Tonight Show through research found on Wikipedia, YouTube, and various other outlets. But now it's time to turn off the research and delve into my personal final thoughts on all the hosts of The Tonight Show from the very beginning. Here we go. Because there was a lot of footage from back before the 1970s Tonight Show missing, there isn't a lot to go off of from Steve Allen's Tonight Show run. But from the footage that is out there, Allen pioneered what The Tonight Show would eventually become. A showcase for variety sketch comedy while doing it with his own way that makes the footage that does exist out there very funny 70 years later. The same can be said for Jack Parr, only unlike Allen, Parr perfected the concept of interviewing these different personalities and not being afraid to ask the hard-hitting questions while also appealing to the character of the interviewee and also using his platform to challenge what could be done on television and pioneering a landmark format that will put The Tonight Show into uncharted territory when Johnny Carson took over. Johnny Carson was, is, and always will be the gold standard for The Tonight Show. He knew how to take the formats pioneered by Allen and Parr and create the traditional talk show format, combining a monologue of the day's current events, sketch comedy, and performances from up-and-coming talents, interviews with not just celebrities but also presidents, astronauts, authors, and many others, combined with an orchestra that set the tone for a traditional talk show format. Carson was a master craftsman of how to entertain and create an entertainment dynasty, and what all late night talkers that would follow strive to be like but could never achieve. Jerry Seinfeld once said that for my entire career, I've heard comedians in bars debate over who do you think is going to get The Tonight Show after Carson leaves. What nobody realizes is that when you left, you were going to pack it up and take it with you, which is what he did, because that show never existed again. There never was a Tonight Show again. It was Carson. That statement couldn't have been more truer, because The Tonight Show really was never the same once Carson ended his tenure, no matter how you felt from future incarnations going forward. Jay Leno had really big shoes to fill when he took over for Carson, not just for that, but coming under the scrutiny of the feud between him and Letterman for the Tonight Show job. But Leno wasn't a complete misfire as host. Leno could be funny, especially during his monologues and during headlines. The guy is a pretty funny comedian in his own merits. His biggest weak link overall was probably as an interviewee, as it feels like he does throw traditional softball questions at his guests, and a lot more of his recurring sketches and gags, with the exception of headlines, are not really all that funny and just seem like people, especially during the jaywalking segments, are just saying stupid things or acting stupid just to get on TV and maybe get a gig out of it. Hell, some of the people in the jaywalking segments actually did get recurring appearances on The Tonight Show later on down the road. But no matter what you thought of him back then, he did lose a lot of his street cred after he basically forced Conan out, especially since when he still believes that he's more the victim than Conan is, which, I'm sorry, I gotta say this, he's been in that job for way too goddamn long. He was the host of The Tonight Show for 17 years, and at some point, you know, like Rosie O'Donnell said to Craig Ferguson, you have to be the better man and ride off into the pasture and let the next generation take over. You don't slash the tires of the guy coming in after you. Jay Leno lost a lot of his loyal fans because of what he and NBC did to Conan, forcing him out of a job that he deserved to have, and because of that, his lasting legacy will forever be tarnished by that conflict in 2010, no matter how long he lives on this planet. As for Conan O'Brien, if I had to pick the best Tonight Show host of all time, it would be Carson, but O'Brien would have been a close second, and I think if he had been given an opportunity to watch his time on The Tonight Show grow, he probably would have surpassed Carson as the greatest Tonight Show host of all time. But for now, I would not only consider him the second best Tonight Show host of all time, but quite possibly the greatest late night host of all time, and honestly, one of the greatest entertainers of all time, period. Conan O'Brien's career was filled with so much backlash, dread, and fears of failure, even all the way back to the beginning of his career and his late night tenure as well. That dread of getting axed every week in your first year had to be incredibly. Conan's TBS show not only was still just as funny as it was before, but TBS gave Conan more creative control to do whatever he wanted to do because it was on basic cable, which is more than probably what he would have gotten on Fox had he accepted those offers beforehand. Not only did Conan continue to prove he still had what it takes late into his tenure as a talk show host, but his ability to take the show outside of its format with the Without Borders show, his podcast Conan O'Brien Needs a Friend, and his recent Max show Conan O'Brien Must Go, proves that O'Brien still has got it even after leaving the late night desk, and will be remembered as I said before, one of the greatest entertainers in history. As for Jimmy Fallon, it's very complicated. Look, I don't hate Jimmy Fallon as a comedian like most people do. He's proven time and time again on Saturday Night Live that he could be really funny, especially during Weekend Update, and I thought he was really good in Fever Pitch. His film career as a whole was not a success, and it seemed like Fallon was primed and ready to find success in late night, and for the most part he started off strong as the host of Late Night, having a pretty good, solid 5-year run on the show before advancing to The Tonight Show, where the first couple of years of that show were solid as well. And then the Trump interview happened, and that's when Fallon's flaws as a talk show host really began to unfold, as he, somehow worse than Leno did, asked Trump softball questions and tried to humanize a monster even after all the atrocious things he said and done. Something that Fallon has even admitted to calling as a setback. And the sad truth is, that's just the recent trend of The Tonight Show, just showing that it's hard to do a show like The Tonight Show and find that same top-tier entertainment value that people like Carson, Leno, and O'Brien had in the past, because the spectrum has changed significantly from late-night television as a whole. as most late-night shows fail to capture the zeitgeist that they once used to have, and the political spectrum in the last decade has really ruined the appeal and value of late-night television. You could say the same thing about Saturday Night Live, a show that was so groundbreaking, it was a game-changer in the 1970s, and has had many successful runs over its near 50-year run, but ever since 2006, that zeitgeist and purpose for SNL existing really doesn't exist anymore, as they've lost a lot of their muster with political humor, which there was a time when SNL at election time was peak comedy, making this even more shocking how the last decade has completely dismantled that excitement. It's just being nothing but the same jokes over and over and over again. Not also helping Jimmy Fallon as a whole is that the comedy really struggles. I was watching one episode to get ready for this documentary because I hadn't seen the show in a long time, and I wanted to give it a fair chance before putting this together. I thought the monologue was pretty funny, and then some of the early setups for jokes were pretty good, but he does this segment with this audience suggestion box. And again, some jokes did get some laughs early on, but the segment does start to drag on. They start throwing in other sketches within the sketches, and then there's no real punchline to the whole thing at the end. The ending of this is one of the most... I couldn't believe this. Like, the segment ends with Jimmy Fallon building this joke up with, let's play a game of you know what that sound means, where you just hear all these random sounds and Fallon asking the audience, you know what that means? And it just goes on and on and on, and it never ends.
She says, hey, Jimmy, you should play the game, you know what that sound means. Oh, I love that game. Uh-oh, you know what that sound means? It's time for this sound. You know what that sound means? It's time for this sound. You know what that sound means? It's time for 3 sounds at once. You know what that sound means?
Get on with it. Yes, get on with it.
Get on with it! When it finally does, you want to know what the punchline was? You want to know what all those sounds were for? Free Ben & Jerry's Tonight Show ice cream. That's it. That was the whole point of that segment, just to plug his ice cream and give it to his fans. I mean, I get it, you gotta sell the stuff here, but come on, man. Like, you cannot set up punchlines to be nothing but plugs here. I mean, that would be like me ending a joke and saying, hit the like and subscribe button to this channel. Like, you can't do that. Like, that's the point where I just gave up and I lost all hope for this show. Like, Fallon may be a decent comedian and hosting personality, and you can tell that he clearly has a passion for entertaining and his heart is in the right place, but I'm sorry. Moments like that, those segments and comedic setups that lead to absolutely nothing but product placements, really make it official that Fallon's Tonight Show is the worst late-night show on TV right now. You know, I can still get laughs from watching people like Stephen Colbert, Jimmy Kimmel, Seth Meyers, John Oliver, the guys of The Daily Show, but Fallon is just that one guy that is struggling to find an identity for his Tonight Show that can appeal to everyone and make it stand out. Fallon's ambitions are clearly there, but his show is the one late-night show that's stuck in trying to be funny and exist in the current late-night state. But here's the oddest thing about the current late-night state. For all we know, Jimmy Fallon could end up being the last Tonight Show host ever, because quite honestly, I can't imagine NBC would want to continue a franchise like The Tonight Show that's stuck in a creative flux like this. And how anybody in the next guy's place could take the show to the next level with the late-night landscape changing as a whole, like... Seth Meyers maybe could probably do that because he does such a different show than Jimmy Fallon does, but even then, we might be overall witnessing the end of The Tonight Show as a franchise, and Fallon could be the last guy standing to close it out. But in all honesty, it's just wishful thinking. Who knows? Maybe The Tonight Show can find new life down the road, and we just haven't seen it yet. But, you know, despite my criticisms of it, no matter what happens, though, The Tonight Show still has a notable place in television history for the accomplishments that it did achieve. The format it helped to create, the comedy it created that still holds up many decades later, the moments that will still be remembered for years and years to come, the talent that came out of these shows that went on, and these people that went on to become superstars in their own rights, and its 6 hosts, the hosts who are on the marquee of the shows that they respectively held, and the legacies they leave behind. No matter what generation you come from, what decade you come from, what age bracket you come from, The Tonight Show has held a place in all of our hearts, and no matter what happens from this point going forward, its legacy will never be forgotten.
Of course, I wouldn't be here tonight if it weren't for the previous Tonight Show hosts, so I want to say thank you to Steve Allen, Jack Parr, Johnny Carson, Jay Leno, Conan O'Brien, and Jay Leno. Very, very nice.
This has been the greatest 22 years of my life.
And I'm really excited for Jimmy Fallon. You know, it's fun to kind of be the old guy and sit back here and see where the next generation takes this great institution.
You people watching, I can only tell you that it's been an honor and a privilege to come into your homes all these years and entertain you. And I hope when I find something that I want to do and I think you will like, come back as gracious and inviting into your home as you have been. I bid you a very heartfelt good.
There must be a better way of making a living in this. You have been teaching to me always. Mac, you know what I said?
Since you're just joining us, this is Tonight. And I can't think of too much to tell you about it, except I want to give you the bad news first. This program is going to go on forever. Boy, you think you're tired now. Wait till you see 1 o'clock roll around.